living carefree one day at a time in the modern world. People could not understand that they were in mortal danger. They believed in the myths of scientists about the top tier they occupied among all the populations of the planet. But it was an unforgivable mistake for which I soon had to pay the price. The demons that had been underground all this time broke out to the surface, proving the opposite. It was a cruel civilization that desired the destruction of all living things. Using supernatural power and the effect of surprise, they managed to destroy many men and women. Those who remained were forced to hide, for from now on the monsters were the masters of the land. All attempts to resist and wage war against the invaders ended in defeat. Ordinary weapons had no effect on demons because the evil spirits possessed magical abilities, with which she could easily crush any number of opponents to pieces. However, very soon it is unknown how gifted people also began to appear among people. The generation of superhumans had similar magical abilities to the invaders, which were rapidly developing. Soon, the gifted became the main weapon in the confrontation between humanity and demons. Special units of warriors destroyed more and more dungeons and liberated the land every day. With great effort, we managed to tame all the centers of impurity and reach the gates of hell. The seven strongest united into a squad, and in the year 2005 descended into the dungeon for the last time. They gave a powerful rebuff to the last demon lair and put an end to years of bloodshed. When the war ended, these young men and women were christened saviors by humanity. They were raised to an unprecedented pedestal of honor. The love of millions, money, attention, influence, everything they received through their work seemed like a dream. But it was only possible thanks to one person who did not return from the mission. The guy who was the leader of the squad was called Johnny, and a monument was erected in his honor. This symbol of exaltation was to remind people of his feat. The legendary warrior who closed the gates of hell and saved humanity became the national pride of Korea. 17 years have passed since then, and the world has changed a lot. Since peace has reigned on Earth since then, warriors with super abilities began to compete with each other in the arena. With the help of technology, each representative of the national teams had their own avatar. Therefore, fights could be held as close as possible to the bloody realities of real combat. Now the favorite of the competition was the invincible Nathan Bernard, the representative of France. The guy was so fast that none of his opponents could counter him. Once powerful, South Korea was now languishing at the bottom of the league table. The head coach of the national team listened with sadness to the commentators praising Nathan. Now only Rihanna remains, the strongest Korean warrior who could somehow change the outcome. Just now, with a sinking heart, the audience watched as the girl began her attack. Ri ran up to Nathan planning to attack him with a whip. She relied on the effect of surprise until suddenly the rivals' gazes met. The girl was the daughter of one of the members of the rescue squad, and indeed had good performance. But it was impossible to cope with such a competitor alone. Nathan, with a sharp movement of one of his blades, destroyed Rihanna in a matter of seconds. The French representative defeated the Korean team in a dry match. It was a truly shameful spectacle. The spectators who watched the fight and cheered for their heroes were incredibly disappointed. The national team coach felt great sadness and disappointment. The man's name was Colin. He was Ria's father and one of the members of that legendary rescue squad. The Korean team was deeply disgraced by the results of this year's World Games. Gradually, the reputation of the strongest nation became a myth against the backdrop of modern defeats. The proof of this was the millions of comments from fans for whom war was just a word, and defeat in the arena was tantamount to absolute disaster. People demanded the immediate dismissal of the players and coach. The only one who was not affected by their anger was Rihanna. None of the spectators were in a hurry to leave the arena. They were expecting an apology, and Colin knew that he would have to endure unpleasant moments. This disaster will cost him his career and perhaps tarnish his great name. During her husband's tenure, South Korea has never been able to win a competition. The only comforting thing was that Rihanna was not without abilities after all. But the girl didn't have a reliable team to rely on, and that was the main problem. Over 17 years, thanks to wrong policies, many capable warriors emigrated to other countries, and those who remained did not have enough skills and fortitude to put up a worthy fight. During his 3 years of coaching, Colin often mentioned Johnny, and now, as he went to make an official statement about his dismissal, the man almost wished he had come back to life. The coach felt that in the course of his own life, he had slid into an abyss, taking the wrong path. Colin would probably give anything in the world to have Johnny by his side right now. The leader of the Savior Squad was the strongest warrior the world had ever known. But it was no longer possible to pull the cat by the tail. No one canceled public punishment, especially since one of the assistants announced his full readiness to perform. He walked past the man, squeezing his shoulder in farewell. Colin considered the country's participation in world competitions an absolute mistake. Until candidates worthy of attention emerge, Korea will be accompanied by constant shame. That's why resigning didn't seem like such a bad option. The man could not allow his own glorious name to be further mired in mud. Therefore, I did not want to hear any persuasions regarding this decision. The national team coach's thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. On the other end of the phone was the president of the sports association, and Colin thought that once again, he would hear angry accusations against his side. Therefore, before making any comments, he immediately apologized for the team's defeat. But the president of the association impatiently interrupted him, insisting that the man watch the news. The words Colin heard were like a bolt from the blue. The leader of the rescue squad, Johnny, teleported to the human world a few minutes ago. A guy fell unconscious at the foot of his own statue in downtown Seoul. At first, the people nearby couldn't understand what exactly happened, but they hurried to find out the identity of the newcomer, wary of his armor. With the help of countless fans in the press, it was confirmed. This guy is Johnny, the savior of humanity. All these 17 years the man was alive, moreover. For him, time seemed to have stopped. This event was so significant that it immediately shook the entire world. But most of all, Colin was delighted with this news, as he had been dreaming about it just a few minutes ago. It was necessary to rush to the hospital, where the victim was immediately taken. There was no question of forgiveness and release. Johnny's appearance could revive the glory of the nation. A fierce battle was taking place in the brain of the hero, who had still not regained consciousness. Demons surrounded him on all sides, trying unsuccessfully to overcome him. Although Johnny was left alone without the support of his team, he was still too powerful to die so easily. His speed seemed to be increasing somehow, but there was no time to think about it. The guy didn't expect to ever be able to escape from the gates of hell, but he wasn't going to stop either. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, depending on him, and in the end, the gate to the dungeon closed. From now on, war was to remain a thing of the past. But Johnny knew that he wouldn't see it himself, because there was still a whole army of evil spirits standing against him. The hero prepared for death, accepting that it was a glorious and worthy of him. The warrior decided to take as many enemies with him as possible. This was the last thing the young man remembered when he woke up in a cold sweat in a hospital bed. At first, he walked away from the nightmare for a few minutes, trying to understand where he was. A nurse ran into the ward, hearing strange sounds, and asked about the patient's well-being. She explained that Johnny was in the hospital. The next shocking news was that 17 years had passed since his disappearance. The warrior could not believe it. For him, several days had passed since the start of the last battle. The nurse didn't know how best to explain all the changes that had occurred during this time and simply turned on the TV. The hero stared intently at the flat screen in front of him. They showed news stories about him. The announcer reported that the young man had fallen from the sky to the foot of his own statue, and he is currently undergoing examination at a medical facility, so no one had detailed information. The news from the doctors was comforting that no serious injuries were found on the hero's body. Theories have already been put forward about the fact that the guy has not changed at all in appearance. Scientists assumed that Johnny had fallen into a space-time anomaly in which he accidentally got lost. After watching the news, the hero realized that what was said was not a joke at all. It was difficult to comprehend. The reaction of the journalist was also expected, which the nurse immediately noticed. Vultures gathered at the entrance to the hospital, waiting for at least some comments from the savior. 17 years passed, and they still annoyed Johnny immensely. In this regard, the year 2022 was no different from 2005. The young man asked for a mirror. He wanted to see if he really hadn't changed at all. He rubbed his face, trying to find any wrinkles, but it was all in vain. According to his passport, he should have been a middle-aged man. Suddenly, Johnny's mind was filled with material things, and he, frightened, inquired about his fortune. The nurse said that, according to his will, all the money was donated to an orphans fund, and the hero's estate was turned into a museum, which was in great demand. Movable property, such as cars, was sold at various auctions for charitable purposes. From all of the above, it could be concluded that Johnny had nothing left. He was literally a hungry homeless man. Such bleak prospects had crippled the guy. But the nurse hurried to calm him down. She assured him that Colin would not leave the warrior in trouble. The man just called the hospital himself and promised to come as soon as possible. The savior of humanity was a national treasure and should have understood and felt how important he was to Korea. Watching Seoul from the window of his ward, Johnny did not recognize the city. He decided not to waste time and analyze the condition of his body using one of the skills. With the help of an analytical gaze, the guy could even predict the future of any object. His potential and strengths that needed to be developed, not to mention the present. Thanks to competent analysis, Johnny was able to develop his abilities the fastest among his competitors. And soon he became the coolest warrior on the planet and the leader of the main squad of demon fighters. And in addition, it was thanks to his analytical gaze that he saw Colin and began to teach him. Back then, that boy dreamed of joining his group. After seeing the candidate's performance, Johnny decided to give him a chance. Colin had tremendous potential and skills that the fighter squadron lacked. Checking his own indicators, the hero did not see anything critical, but he did notice some changes. His willpower exceeded the maximum permissible value for humans. This was very strange because internally, Johnny did not feel any extraordinary changes in himself. On top of everything, from now on he had the power of immortality. The warrior was eager to try it out in practice. He understood that such an upgrade came about because of his achievements in the battle at the gates of hell, although he could remember almost nothing about it. Johnny's thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of Colin, who quickly burst into the room. Of course, the hero remembered him completely differently. Now a middle-aged man stood before him. But the national team coach was amazed that the commander had not changed at all. Colin was so overcome with happiness that he couldn't hold back his tears. This brought out that familiar, cheerful smile in Johnny that the man had missed for many years. Thus began a casual, cheerful conversation between two friends and comrades in arms. They chatted until late at night, the coach trying to tell as much news as possible. The commander was impressed by the fact that the city around him was completely peaceful and people were not afraid to go out. Johnny remembered that he had asked Colin to write his biography before sending the group away, and now he was interested in whether his subordinate had fulfilled his request. The coach laughed in response. He actually hired someone to write a fantasy novel in honor of his leader. On top of everything, he created several films dedicated to Johnny that became blockbusters. Listening to the stories of his interlocutor, the commander suddenly felt sad again. He didn't know what to do in this vast, peaceful world that was moving forward all this time. All the exploits were in the past, and in the present tense the boy had nothing on his mind. But Colin immediately stopped the interlocutor's spleen. He was ready to do anything for Johnny. This mature behavior of the former subordinate prompted the commander to talk about work. The national team coach said that he wisely took care of his savings, and indeed now he didn't deny himself anything. But despite his wealth, Colin still had a job to top it off. He said that he works as the head coach of the Korean national team. He was embarrassed to share more details, which were shrouded in complete shame. But Johnny insisted, so a detailed analysis of the World Cup began. Colin showed clips from matches between national teams of different countries. The area where everything took place was very similar to the Demon Dungeons from 2005, but the coach explained that this was just a simulation and the competition was called the Battle of Superhumans. In peacetime, men and women with abilities found this way to make money, and although Johnny did not see the merit in this, the competition was in great demand among the spectators. Some players from participating countries could boldly compete with each of the squad of saviors of humanity, and because of their strength and popularity, they were also considered the national pride of their homelands. Ultimately, Colin's inspiring story prompted the commander to ask a logical question. The guy was curious about where the South Korean national team ranks in the world rankings. Johnny hoped that the national team had good results based on the data of his time. Therefore, the answer from his former subordinate completely threw him off track. Last place in the ranking was absolutely not what the mighty warrior wanted to hear. When the hospital finally discharged the patient, Colin decided to take him home. Along the way, he talked about why, in his opinion, everything turned out the way it did for the Korean team. After the demons lost the war, the country's authorities began to fear the warriors. She did everything to ensure that the gift had emigrated, and those who remained found themselves within the rigid framework of a new game, the Battle of Superhumans. The only chance for survival for people who knew martial arts was cooperation with the state. Businessmen made money on them, but, frankly, they allowed you to earn good money yourself. The talk about officials angered Johnny, who had hated them all his life. Believing that the perfect moment had arrived, Colin decided to invite the commander to participate in the game, but he was categorically against it. The guy didn't want to live in battles anymore. He was confused, but he didn't dare admit it. The only thing Johnny clearly realized was that he no longer craved the attention of others. He needed time to adapt, and in the near future, the hero had small plans for himself. The warrior knew what societal pressure was and wanted to avoid it by any means possible. The conversation had to be postponed until better times, especially when Johnny noticed Rihanna on one of the banners. Of course, he didn't recognize the little girl he had nursed as a child. Now she was a beautiful girl, who moreover was a member of the national team. The hero's obscene thoughts were stopped by Colin's remark that this was his daughter. Shocked, Johnny looked at his friend, unable to comprehend this information for several minutes. Eventually, after the commander's sincere apology, the conversations in the car stopped until they reached the house. The national team coach's fortune turned out to be truly impressive. On the threshold, the guest was met by Mary Colin's wife, who was also gifted. The guy and the woman exchanged mutual compliments. They were both really happy to see each other. Seeing his old friends together right in front of him, Johnny finally realized reality. He was really on Earth in the future, and all of this was really happening. Peaceful life was completely unknown to the fierce warrior and required careful study. Instead of looking for enemies, his task from now on was to find himself. In the evening, Johnny relaxed, forgot all the troubles when he turned on the TV. The screen was showing another episode of the last drama he watched before disappearing. The guy decided that this was a special sign that could not be ignored. He set a goal to watch all the episodes of his favorite visual novel. And in general, life didn't end with one TV series because there were so many of them since 2005. Colin, who was passing by, was struck by his comrade's mood. The man hoped that the commander would change his decision after all, especially in light of the incredible crowd of journalists around his estate. Indeed, many interested parties were interested in the national hero's decision regarding his further participation in the game. They even set up a sort of campsite under the windows of the national team coach. Seeing the crowd outside with his own eyes, Johnny became seriously angry. After considering his decision for a few minutes, the guy nevertheless agreed to a press conference. He ordered his comrade to gather the press at some place tomorrow. The hero believed that he could force the villains to leave him alone in one meeting. Colin decided that the best place for this event would be the hotel conference room. In the morning, everything was ready to welcome the respected hero. Johnny resolutely stepped onto the podium, giving the impression of a balanced person. He began his speech with a short speech in which he touched on the events of his return, but he admitted that he knew almost nothing about it and couldn't tell. At first, Colin was even surprised by the commander's good behavior, but it was premature. Suddenly, the savior's mood changed dramatically, and he announced that everyone should get rid of him. After such an abrupt ending, Johnny agreed to answer questions. One by one, journalists raised their hands and asked what they were interested in. Finally, it was the turn of one of the most impudent members of the press. It was about competing with people. Those present were curious about whether Johnny would want to join the ranks of the South Korean national team, and he shouted a negative answer to the entire hall, shouting over the vultures. But the journalist was not going to give up, demanding a detailed answer. He began to press on the feeling of pride, hinting that the hero was afraid of losing. But this only made Johnny laugh. The provocation failed miserably. The guy emphasized that he will not succumb societal pressure and will decide for himself how to live his life. Deciding that he had answered all the questions, the warrior said goodbye to those present and turned to leave. But already on the threshold, he was stopped by a boy in the corner of the hall. He reported on American Gerald Walker, who made disparaging remarks about the rescue squad. Of course, Johnny didn't understand what was going on and didn't know this person. As it turned out, the man was a member of the American team with a very hot temper. But despite his long tongue, he was not among the top 3 players in the world. After hearing the explanation, the hero calmly replied that in that case, he was not worthy of an answer. And to prove his point, Johnny agreed to face the bully in real combat. Face to face with his own hands, he promised to wring the scoundrel's neck. Since the guy was an important person for the planet, the press conference was broadcast to the whole world. So Walker and his agent also saw Johnny's response. The guy's manner of communication greatly irritated the American fighter. He expressed a desire to immediately fly to Korea and accept the challenge of the enemy. The next morning, the entire superhuman world of Korea was on edge, everyone except Johnny. Colin was informed of the American side's plans, which were prompted by his comrade's words. And now the entire national team had to be responsible for the character of the hero in the ring. And this could only mean one thing for the country, a crushing defeat. The coach couldn't let the former commander get away with it. He was outraged by Johnny's indifference. Therefore, the man hurried to remind his interlocutor of his loud statements from the podium and relayed Walker's decision. The restless American was hurt by the mention that he was not among the top 3 fighters in the world, and thus trying to get the desired opponent, decided to manipulate threats to fight against the entire South Korean team. Johnny would still be lying on the couch if it weren't for the mention that Rihanna would be taking part in this. This meant he would be able to meet the most beautiful girl he had seen since his return. And indeed, a few hours later, Colin's daughter crossed the threshold of the house. While his mother joyfully ran to meet the newcomer, Johnny listened intently to what was happening. Ree was in a good mood. She was looking forward to seeing her uncle, who hadn't been around for so long. So it was decided to postpone the discussion of recent life events until later. The hero, shyly but extremely friendly, waved to the girl while sitting on the sofa. The beauty's reaction was violent. She rushed headlong into Johnny's arms, laughing happily. The leader of the Saviors was incredibly pleased to feel such love for himself from Ree. The whole house seemed to be filled with light when they began to communicate. Rihanna remembered Johnny's attitude towards her well. He always tried to pamper her, and the boy couldn't take his eyes off the grown-up, beautiful girl that child had turned into. It's unclear how, but the discussion of past years turned into a conversation about the competition. Colin's daughter couldn't believe that her uncle was no longer interested in fighting. He, as always, expressed his categorical position on this matter. It was very difficult to refuse because Ree decided to use the heavy artillery of her charm against Johnny. At one point, she even pretended to be incredibly offended by him. Realizing that this would not win over her uncle, the girl decided to take a roundabout route. She invited the hero to join her for the association's avatar test. The young lady even begged for it. Eventually, the wall that had isolated Johnny from the world cracked, and the boy agreed. Ree was incredibly happy because it meant she still had a chance to change his mind. An hour later, the car delivered them to the Superhuman Battle Association building. The chief technician politely led them to the testing room. The man invited Colin's daughter to try out her new avatar, and she agreed. With confident movements, she checked her weapon and put on her helmet. A moment later, the large screen turned on, showing a projection of Rihanna ready for action. Johnny, who had never seen such technology before, was of course incredibly impressed. The girl asked to start the first battle with some monster. The technician chose a giant mutant wolf as his opponent. The warrior liked the appearance of one of the dungeon monsters, moreover, in such a detailed image. The computer genius began to explain to the rescuer the technical features of this esports. The story interested the hero so much that he couldn't wait to see all the possibilities of technology. A battle began on the screen. The angry monster rushed at full speed towards the girl, who didn't even move. When he got as close as possible, Rihanna snapped her whip. Its end wrapped around the monster's neck, preventing it from moving freely. The girl jumped up, tightening the noose, and the wolf began to suffocate. Turning in midair, Rai cut off her opponent's head with her sword. At this point, the avatar check was completed. The system noted that all indicators were working properly. Rising from her chair, the leader of the national team immediately ran up to her uncle, interested in his opinion. Johnny, of course, praised her for her efforts, but in his own dismissive way. This angered Rihanna, and she suggested he try the program on himself. Of course, the offer was rejected, but the cunning girl did not give up trying to get what she wanted. She was eager to see what the warrior was capable of, because before, Rai had not been allowed to observe such things. Obviously, it was impossible for Johnny to resist the sad eyes of his beautiful interlocutor, so the boy agreed, although he continued to grind his teeth in anger. The lead technician immediately supported this idea, suggesting that the fighter choose a chair. He explained that to begin with, you always need to check the player's abilities. But because Johnny was not going to join the national team, this rule could be circumvented. In order not to be left unarmed in the digital world, it was necessary to choose some artifact. Now, standard weapons in the form of a spear and shield were available in the training room. After some thought, Johnny chose only the spear for himself. He wanted to get this thing over with as quickly as possible and returned to his couch. A few seconds later, sitting in his chair, he received his first connection to the virtual world. The system scanned the new participants' information quite quickly, and in a moment, Johnny's avatar was already standing in the virtual dungeon. The guy felt quite strange. You could even say that it was like a call from the past. The lead technician made it so that the boy could see him on the screen next to his face. After adapting a little and stretching his bones, the hero asked to generate a monster for himself. A few seconds later, a monster appeared above his head, somewhat resembling a Salirbane. The programmer explained that this creature could not be destroyed with conventional weapons, so she was a little different from the monster Johnny had spoken of. The monster, seeing its enemy, immediately attacked it. He was rapidly approaching, and the hero, in turn, threw away his weapon, which was useless in this case. With one movement of his fingers, he struck the monster with such force that not a single wet spot remained on it. Shocked, Rihanna and the head technician could not control their facial expressions. The girl had never seen such strong people before. Like the technician, who immediately began to doubt the veracity of what he saw. Johnny was tired of the empty chatter, so he asked to generate someone stronger. The guy wanted to test his new skill of immortality, because there was no difference between the game and reality. While the technician was looking for someone worthy among the opponents, something unexpected happened. The system unexpectedly failed, and intrusion occurred. The frightened programmer could not prevent the system from being hacked. A few seconds later, Gerald Walker appeared in the dungeon, next to Johnny. He brazenly declared that he wanted a vendetta and agreed to the hero's invitation. Since the young man simply stared at the man in silence, the man decided that this was evidence of cowardice. Therefore, he exploded even more with anger and impatience. Gerald rushed to attack his unmoved opponent. His sword was dangerously close to Johnny's face. But when Walker struck a second later, it turned out that there was no one in front of him. The surprised giant looked around. The surprise was that the enemy was already behind him. After some thought, Johnny decided that such a candidate was the perfect test of his abilities. The fight was approved by both sides, so no one stopped synchronizing. Both opponents analyzed each other, taking their time to strike the first blow. The worries of Rihanna and the lead technician were interrupted by the appearance of unexpected guests. Her father visited the training room with Gerald's manager and the association president, who assured that the fight was sanctioned and that it was okay. As it turned out, this trio took a good chance without asking Johnny for permission. The president of the Korean Association saw this as a good opportunity to move up in the world rankings. Walker's manager was quite satisfied with this offer. The main thing for her was to reassure the client. Colin thought his friend wouldn't be too nervous about this. And others thanked all the gods for Johnny agreeing to participate in the creation of his avatar. A fight broke out, and for now it was unclear which of the opponents was stronger. These were short attacks with gaps for regrouping, during which both men had a chance to catch their breath. Johnny respectfully appreciated the abilities of the American giant. He was as strong and durable as possible, but inferior in speed. Behind his long tongue and wayward character was hidden considerable power. This candidate was perfect to join to conquer another dungeon. But what was relevant now was the test of one's own immortality, not victory in battle. Therefore, Johnny quickly ran to the attack and at the last moment stopped near the opponent. At first, Walker didn't notice anything and hit his opponent with all his strength, hoping to win. But then, to the giant's strange logic of the hero of South Korea, despite all the cryptic warnings, Johnny was almost completely crushed to the ground by the impact. Everyone who watched the fight held their breath. It is obvious that the legendary warrior lost the battle of his own free will, and it was incomprehensible. He stopped the rapid attack, allowing his opponent to win. But the surprise became even greater when Johnny's voice came from the makeshift crater. He flew up the mountain so fast that Gerald had to back away. The one who was thought to be dead in the game turned out to be extremely alive and agile, which equally scared and angered the opponent. A wave of interest swept through the training room. The young man had no scars except for a torn tracksuit. Johnny was absolutely delighted with the test result and beamed with happiness. The hero explained that he received this superpower after the battle at the gates of hell. Despite such significant advantages, this skill was unnecessary for a fair fight, so the guy asked the technician to temporarily block it if possible. After a few seconds of clarification, the programmer answered in the affirmative and began the process. For Walker, Johnny explained that the upcoming defeat should not be related to his super strength. Therefore, he should forget about this short-lived and unfortunate incident. The giant heard the sarcasm in his opponent's voice and without haste went on the attack. On the way, throwing the hero his spear for equal opportunities. But Johnny started to tease him again. The guy reminded me of Gerald's position in the world rankings. He knew that this was a big trigger for an American and was betting on it. Ignoring everything in the world, the giant forgot about his steps. He flew towards his opponent. Walker wanted revenge. The swords of the fighters clashed several times, but none reached the body of the opponent. At some point, the American again lost the extremely fast Korean hero. But he didn't even think about hiding. He was standing behind the giant's back. He only managed to look back when the blade of Johnny's spear almost touched his face. Gerald recoiled, not realizing that he would already be dead if his opponent had wanted him to. The more intense the fight, the wider the smile on the hero's face became. But in the end, he got tired of such dancing, and the guy decided to end the fight. He swung and threw the spear towards Walker. The force of the impact sent the American flying a long distance back. When the attack was over, Gerald looked out from the side of his shield, not knowing what else to expect. After analyzing the situation a little, the man realized that his opponent did not want him dead. Johnny controlled the trajectory of the weapon, aiming to teach the American a lesson. And taking advantage of his opponent's confusion, he decided to give him some advice. Walker's problem was precisely his giant shield, behind which he could not see the world. And if the fighter chose a smaller artifact, his blind spots could be reduced or even disappear altogether. To support his own theory, Johnny added several strong arguments, and in the end he convinced the giant of his rightness and expertise. The guy wasn't afraid that his opponent would become stronger because he understood that he couldn't rise to his level. Not only was Gerald impressed by the hero's actions, but so were the spectators present. Colin was most angered by this nuance, keeping in mind the weakness of the Korean team. Having done everything that was planned, Johnny decided that he needed to end the virtual session. But finally, I still didn't forget to remind you about decent tuition fees. Walker agreed, but put forward one significant condition in his opinion. He wanted to repeat the fight in 2 weeks, but under full game conditions. Realizing that they were again trying to drag him into unnecessary nonsense, Johnny refused even the money. But the giant did not back down. He furiously demanded that the boy participate in the competition. But I didn't hear any objections. Considering the behavior of the most powerful person on the planet, in his opinion, irresponsible, the audience silently watched the obscene exchange between the two former opponents on the screen. The president of the association was pleased that an American would perhaps do the most difficult recruiting job. This was a chance to restore the glorious reputation of Korean superhumans. The next morning, Johnny began, like the previous one, by watching a drama in Colin's living room. But I didn't get to finish watching my favorite series because, after a while, the news came on. From every iron, they started talking about his duel with the American and his possible participation in the games. From what the announcer was saying, it was obvious that some scoundrel from the association was leaking information to the media. Johnny was incredibly angry about this circumstance. The guy decided to immediately find out who was who and give all the scoundrels a hard time. The hero flew to the Korea Superhuman Battle Association building at full speed. He was seething with anger and demanded explanations. Michael, the president of the association, tried his best to avoid this conversation, but to no avail. Johnny demanded to know the name of the person who ruined his fight with Gerald. The guy had all the evidence in his hands, so this time responsibility could not be avoided. The culprit cut out the part where the young man refused to participate in the fights and invented a fake sensation. Suddenly, Michael interrupted his interlocutor's screams with his apology and bowed respectfully. The president assured that it was not in his power to contain the avalanche of news. It was the initiative of the Americans. He pressed so hard for pity that Johnny even got confused. The guy understood that this was some kind of cunning trap, especially when Michael said he had come up with the perfect plan. The hero's participation in the game was to take place only if the Americans won 100% over the Koreans. Of course, such conditions were unacceptable to the leader of the Saviors, but the association president did not back down, insisting that the outcome would be positive. He even began to feel sorry for himself for risking his own place. The words poured out of his mouth without pause, giving the boy no chance to respond with a denial. In the end, Michael's speech touched Johnny's heart. He agreed to the association president's conditions only because of their shared past. Now it was necessary to hope that the national team would manage to kill at least one opponent. Johnny seized on this development of event and did not want to think about his own participation in tournaments. But Michael himself, smiling in the guy's face on the contrary, dreamed of Korea's obvious defeat. Thus, the chance to revive the country's glorious future was already looming on the horizon. In the evening, after the president and Johnny had dinner, Korea was torn apart by the news. Information leaked to the media that the hero had agreed to America's offer, and the results of the national team match will finally determine the fate of his participation in the games. Driving the guy crazy, all he wanted to do at the end of the day was watch dramas, and not to see your own face everywhere. The news upset the guy so much that he decided not to turn on the TV the next morning. As he approached the window, Johnny suddenly heard the rather familiar sounds of a struggle from the street. It turned out that Rihanna was training near the house under the supervision of Colin. The man chased his daughter just as the hero once chased him, and this seemed very strange to the leader of the Saviors. Although I enjoyed watching the gifted girl, Colin made Raya support player for the team, and in his opinion, she was making progress in that direction. Of course, the man lacked Johnny's analytical vision, so he couldn't grasp the truth. Since it was in the hero's best interest, he decided to help make progress. Rihanna had good agility and willpower, but they had already reached their maximum. There was nowhere to develop in this direction. Moreover, the girl was significantly inferior to her father in terms of performance. Colin trained his daughter to have completely different performance. Immersed in building a strategy, Johnny didn't even notice how he approached his comrades. The guy decided not to beat around the bush and directly pointed out the family's mistakes. The national team coach disagreed with the hero's vision and insisted on his own tactics. Therefore, the leader of the Saviors had to be sharp in his statements. Johnny backed up his arguments with arguments that were impossible to refute. In the end, the guy led those present to believe that Rihanna was significantly different from her father. The hero was curious about what was going on in the girl's head and asked her about her attack strategy. Of course, she insisted on cooperating with her partners and did not want to complete everything on her own. The hero explained that Rihanna must develop her swordsmanship skills and her own strength. The girl should rely more on her own strength because she has a weak team. Johnny took a whip and a sword to demonstrate key techniques for these weapons. In front of his surprised comrades, the guy chopped up the training dummy in a second. After finishing his demonstration, the guy immediately began demanding a repetition of his own techniques. He announced that from now on, Rihanna will be the player who deals the main damage to the opponent. This news was a huge surprise for father and daughter. Not hearing a refusal, Johnny ordered the girl to immediately start strength training. And to top it all off, he brought her father here, throwing 500 approaches. There were only 14 days left to train the team leader, and the hero did not want to miss the chance. The giant from the U.S. team also practiced significant changes at this time, which the Korean advised him to make. Gerald changed his shield to a smaller one and immediately became much more agile and faster. The team manager noticed this and promised the man good career development. The player was promised a reward for conscientious and regular training and skill development. Walker immediately asked how much he could expect. The manager promised with a smile that $10 million would be the fighter's new fee. Upon hearing this specific amount, the giant ordered his interlocutor to pass it on to Johnny. Gerald paid no attention to the representative's reaction because he always had to keep his word, and he promised. It was necessary to strictly adhere to all the details of the agreement with the hero, because at stake was their meeting in battle on the international arena. 2 long Sundays of diligent training passed, and the long-awaited Day X arrived. Korean fans and sports commentators couldn't wait for the show to begin. The fate of Johnny's appearance as a member of the national team was to be decided today. All participants sat in their chairs and uploaded their avatars, and the casting announcement began. After the announcement of the Korean and American teams, Rihanna's name was announced as the leader, and Gerald Walker as the person on whom the agreement was made with the leader of the Saviors. Johnny himself carefully watched every detail of the competition. He relied only on Rai, in whom he invested everything possible these days for a worthy confrontation. The dungeon of Martha Bourne's old palace, guarded by an army of skeletons, was chosen as the arena. It consisted of 3 independent floors, each with its own boss. On the first floor, the main one was a skeleton warrior, who compared to the others was the weakest. The second floor was completed by a death knight of medium difficulty, and on the third final floor a bone dragon and a lich were lurking. While the teams were taking their starting positions, the organizers announced the rules of the game. The audience held their breath. Everyone was eager to see the outcome. At the command, the competition began and the U.S. squad rushed forward first. The Americans ran straight towards the skeleton army with the obvious intention of engaging in a fight. The battle, given their powerful force, was swift. They acted so harmoniously that they instantly focused all the attention of the audience on themselves. Meanwhile, the Korean national team took a different path. Each of the participants moved at a high speed that they had never shown before. Shocked commentators watched as Rihanna and her team bypassed the ordinary security guards. They weren't going to engage in duels with those heading straight for the boss on the first floor. Everything had been agreed upon in advance with Colin, who mentally praised the boys and girls for their efforts. The coach's tactics were to defeat the main monster on the floor and overtake the opponents. This behavior of the players made an impression on the spectators. For the first time in the history of the games, the Korean team decided to take a risk. If the team manages to eliminate the boss on the floor, they will close the passage above for the US for a while. Given the difference in strength, this was a good chance for a significant advantage. A few minutes later, Rihanna saw a skeleton warrior in front of her. Focusing all their attention on the main battle, the players and coach did not notice the strange lull. Walker and his team had long since cleared the path, but were in no hurry to join the fight. The American scouts secretly observed the actions of the enemy, waiting for the right moment. Realizing that his opponents had a chance to win, Gerald decided to act radically. The man ordered the squad to stay on the first floor and attack the Korean team. He even borrowed strength from one of his team members for such purposes. And then, when the monster was almost finished, something unexpected happened. Rihanna rushed into the final attack, ordering the rest of the team to cover her. But in the heat of the battle, she didn't notice the giant Walker, who knocked the girl off her feet at high speed. Of course, the other members of the national team squad did not have time to react, but only looked around in fear. Colin, realizing that this was the end, was very angry at the treachery of his Western colleagues. Rihanna was eliminated from the game before she could offer any resistance to the enemy. Dealing with the rest of the Korean team, Gerald did praise them for their resourcefulness. But the stakes were too high to give the opponents any advantage in the fight. With one sharp blow, the man got rid of the first floor boss and began the countdown. In 10 minutes, the American team won a complete, undisputed victory over their opponents. Despite the change in strategy, Korea still lost the first round. Today, after enjoying the spectacle for a while, the fans again received a bunch of negative emotions. Tired, Rihanna walked down the hallway to the locker room, sniffling. The girl was in despair, believing that all the training had been in vain. But when she opened the right door, she froze in surprise. All the team members listened in silence as Johnny decided to give them a lecture. The guy didn't accept any objections on this matter. His future depended on it, and he did not want to play under any circumstances. The hero pointed out the team's mistake. They treated their opponents with disdain. The Americans were stronger and more experienced, and therefore dangerous. But the option for fighting remained. It was possible to significantly thin their ranks. Based on his own experience of going through this dungeon, Johnny had an idea. According to his concept, it was not necessary to complete the quest in its entirety, because it was completely pointless, considering the poor preparation of the Korean team. The hero emphasized that the main line from now on will be to observe opponents. Dungeon monsters will be a secondary target. Explaining seemingly elementary things, Johnny sympathized with Colin as a helpless coach. Having overcome his sudden anger at those around him, the warrior continued. He clearly and in detail told those present all the necessary actions to inflict significant damage on the enemy. The next day, the U.S. team surged ahead even faster than in the first round. Commentators have even begun to speculate on the team's next steps. In their opinion, the goal was to eliminate the Korean team, just like last time. But to everyone's surprise, the national team changed its strategy again and confused the spectators. No one in the detachment was going to work on defense and cover the rear. Everyone was rushing forward headlong. Only Johnny knew what was happening and smiled mysteriously, looking at the screen. He clearly saw the team's potential. The main thing was not to miss the right moment. Even Rihanna, this time for some reason, believed that the plan would work 100%. The American scout, like last time, hid near the boss on the floor, waiting for opponents. But to his surprise, the Korean team was nowhere to be seen. The players seemed to have vanished into thin air. Walker thought the Koreans wouldn't change their tactics every round, so he didn't understand what had happened. Gerald was already mentally fighting Johnny, completely disregarding today's confrontation. Suddenly, the man heard a rumble behind him. Looking back, the American saw part of the dungeon wall crumbling before his eyes. The enemy team quickly flew through the newly formed gap towards the U.S. detachment. The opponents were able to take advantage of the numerical advantage and catch Walker by surprise. Rihanna and her team, following Johnny's tip, were able to find a secret path, with the help of which we were able to conduct a good reconnaissance of the opponent's strategy. And now, when only 5 people opposed them, they could compete with them in strength. Rihanna received personal advice from her uncle regarding Gerald. The hero advised the girl to aim at the enemy's legs because now they were in the risk zone. This was due to recent tips during the match. This time, the girl didn't attack alone. She was covered by a magical enhancing aura, thanks to which the forces of the opponents were significantly suppressed. A fierce meat grinder has begun. And although Gerald managed to get rid of 2 enemies, the girl was not far behind him, which extremely infuriated the giant. It turned out that the Korean national team was very cunning. The girl's assistants also contributed, not neglecting any opportunity to cause harm. Realizing that the situation could become critical in this way, Walker called a general meeting. The 3 Americans found themselves surrounded, but not for long, so they had to hurry. The Korean national team now had 8 living players, who incredibly wanted to win. Gerald's murder count gradually increased, but Rihanna almost reached him. She wanted to live up to her uncle's expectations. The girl moved like a shadow, and the opponent could not focus his gaze on her. Waiting for the right moment, Rhea attacked her opponent in the legs, as Johnny advised. But I wasn't going to stop to get bogged down in close combat against a tank. Having run the required distance, she used the whip. A few seconds later, the clumsy Walker was on the ground. His henchmen also had a hard time. Despite the significant losses of the Korean national team, they became heroes in the eyes of the audience. Gerald gritted his teeth as he watched the enemy approach him. He chided himself for his carelessness and condescending attitude. Rihanna pointed her sword at him, and although the man guessed that it was the work of his uncle, he did not confirm it, taking his life. Colin couldn't believe what he saw on the screen. For the first time in his entire coaching career, the team's game picture changed. Johnny smiled contentedly. His future was now secure. The guy won't need to get his hands dirty. Others will teach the American instead. Commentators enthusiastically discussed the dramatic changes in the scores of the 2 teams. But despite Korea's efforts in the end, America won again. The second part of Walker's squad took revenge for the destruction of their leader. But the main thing was the score, and now it did not imply a clear advantage. Korea was able to eliminate 5 opponents. 4 of them fell victim to the sword of Rihanna, the captain of the national team. The crowd in the auditorium erupted in cheers of approval for her. After the second round ended, reporters rushed to interview the national team coach. What happened was considered a significant shift in a long series of losses. People like Colin hoped that this would be the beginning of a winning trajectory. Of course, there were also questions about secret passages on the location, to which the coach honestly replied that he had enlisted the help of an old friend to solve this problem. Johnny, who was sitting nearby and watching what was happening, he was grateful that his name wasn't mentioned. But I guessed from my friend's behavior, you shouldn't expect a satisfactory result for yourself. An interview was also conducted with Rihanna herself, the heroine of the day. The girl did not hide anything and openly praised Johnny as her new coach and strategist. And although the guy was pleased to hear positive feedback from her lips, the warrior was still gradually starting to boil over from the attention he was receiving. Michael interrupted the Savior's leaders' grumbling by appearing nearby. The president of the association did not approve of Johnny's idea of using the secret tunnel to his advantage. And in the end, the guy agreed with him in some aspects. But in general, there was no other option to avoid absolute defeat. Michael also noted Rihanna's changed fighting style, seeing in it some elements of the guy's signature fight. Johnny admitted this, as well as the fact that he enjoyed the preparation process. Taking advantage of the favorable moment, the president of the association decided to offer a job. Despite the usual objections on this matter, Michael promised that he would not bring up the subject again if the boy listened to him to the end. Soon, a big competition was about to begin. a new season of the highest league of players. And there might be a place for Johnny there. The man did not insist on full membership in the team. He was happy with partial participation, not expecting any other response than refusal. The president was surprised by the result. The hero, in all seriousness, promised to think carefully about the proposal. Michael took the boy's behavior as consent. The leader of the Saviors was seriously fascinated by Rihanna, who was in the midst of the battle. And today I caught myself thinking that I would like to be involved in this process. The president of the association was in absolute ecstasy and forgot about his age. He showed what the national team could expect if Johnny joined them. The video of today's second round was gaining record views on all streaming services. This was, of course, interesting, but the hero only thought about getting rid of him. He barely unhooked Michael's hands from him and was now able to breathe freely. The guy understood well that only the best players would play in the top league. Therefore, regarding this, Johnny had his own personal conditions. The president of the association was ready to fulfill any demands of the hero, which he immediately informed his surprised interlocutor about. But after a few seconds, a sly smile lit up the face of the leader of the Saviors. The next morning, another training session was taking place near Colin's house. But this time, the preparation was no longer needed for Rihanna. The comrade was, to put it mildly, not thrilled with this turn of events. But with Michael's light hand, the man unexpectedly became part of Johnny's squad. Of course, Collins was happy that the commander was moving on and decided to live life. But the national team coach understood perfectly well that he was no longer at the right age to compete. Unlike him, the hero was sure that it was worth simply making more effort. The participation of his comrade was for him a necessary reinforcement in the group of losers. Despite all the latter's objections, a dispute dragged on between the brothers, which could not possibly escalate into active action. In the end, Johnny's stubbornness prevailed and Colin had no choice. With an analytical look, the hero assessed the changes in his comrade's abilities. Of course, with age, his performance dropped significantly. But with the right approach and regular training, it was possible to change this. Smiling that familiar, cheerful, and fierce smile, Johnny promised Colin hell. The man, sweating with terror, understood that a new life awaited him from tomorrow. There are 7 days left until the competition, and there have been no significant improvements in the national team coach's technique. Because of this, both men decided to bet on speed. This knowledge was reinforced by years of experience participating in battles to the death. Colin swiftly attacked the personal trainer, practicing maneuvers. In the end, the man did manage to significantly improve his own dexterity. But of course, Johnny managed to beat him off in a leap. The hero praised his subordinate, but did not forget to add that he had previously managed to attack several times. But considering Colin's advanced age, even such a result was noteworthy. Having worked out one successful leap, the man thought he would be given a break. But Johnny, of course, had a different opinion on this matter and insisted on continuing training. He was not satisfied with the workload at half strength before such important tests for the team. I had to call on the hero to stop, citing the need to test the avatar. This needed to be done as soon as possible to calibrate the accuracy of the indicators. The chief technician and his assistant were already waiting for the rescue leader to arrive. Johnny was unhappy about being called back to the association building, but it turned out that the first time the diagnosis was not carried out completely and required significant additions. To work effectively, it was necessary to achieve complete synchronization with the individual. In this case, it was even possible to develop abilities unattainable in reality. There were rumors that the system was a product created by someone's supernatural power. Johnny found this information suspicious. Copying the real world could turn into a disaster. But the chief technician didn't see any elements of a conspiracy theory in this. Unlike the guy, after discussing all the nuances, the team began synchronizing for South Korea's main star. To begin with, you had to focus on the hero's agility, strength, and aura. The process required rigorous training with fast timing. On command, to test his strength, the boy had to pull the handle of a machine gun. The first time Johnny did this, as if trying on a new gadget, The next time the result was better than the previous one. In the end, the strength indicators of the leader of the saviors reached their maximum level, but still they were not considered the greatest for a warrior of his status. To determine agility, another test was required. Johnny had to press levers located in different parts of the room. At the signal, the guy began to move along the indicated trajectory at maximum speed. The agility was so high that no one expected to see it in this case. The indicator exceeded the force by more than 100 points. But Johnny himself did not consider this a great achievement because he understood that he could do better. Therefore, he persuaded the chief technician to test his dexterity once again. The indicators jumped even higher than last time. Better than this was the result of only one person, Nathan Bernard. He scored over 1,000 points and could have competed with Colin when he was young. The Frenchman's performance aroused excitement in the guy, and he decided to break this record. Having agreed to the retest, Johnny focused and concentrated all his energy on one goal. This time, it was impossible to visually track its trajectory. The hero turned into solid energy, but with every second he continued to increase his speed. It seemed that the guy had far surpassed his previous performance. The computer informed me that the testing was complete and I could stop. This time, Johnny's agility matched that of Nathan Bernard. This result led the hero to think that he could go beyond his own capabilities. But this needed confirmation in other disciplines as well. Therefore, the guy turned to the chief technician with a request to repeat the strength testing. At the signal, the leader of the rescue squad pulled the handle of the machine gun. And indeed, having set a goal, he managed to surpass his previous performance. Colin told him the result, and the commander realized that he could do whatever he wanted. Increase strength indicators or agility indicators depending on your own concentration. Aside from the training room, Johnny already felt like this had happened before. At the gates of hell, when he was alone against an army of demons. When he no longer expected to make it out alive, he also increased his own performance. Only thanks to his own willpower, which exceeded all human possibilities. In that case, all the competitions could have been completely useless for him. Returning from the afterlife, the boy felt that some force was confidently pushing him to participate in the game. The final test was to determine the power of the player's aura. The hero simply had to touch the sphere in front of him and release his energy into it. Usually, increasing such indicators was extremely difficult, requiring extensive training and self-discipline. Johnny never managed to reach 100 points, no matter what he did before. And now the guy decided to try the same concentration trick. In front of the amazed spectators, the hero's performance increased without stopping. At some point, the leader of the rescue squad decided that he needed to remove his hand. Because it was impossible for a person to get more than 100 points in this discipline, the testing was concluded with a loud discussion of the results. Johnny's aura score was over 1,000 points. It turned out that the guy had just set a new record for humanity a couple of seconds ago. He was pleased with himself, and the reactions of those around him stroked his ego. The hero was informed that the previous record was set by Catherine, one of the members of his squad. It was because of their self-confidence in this regard that conflicts always arose between them. When the testing was finished, the chief technician announced the limitations. Given the immortality skill, the board decided to block it. As compensation, the parties agreed to receive cash payments. Worried only about the financial component of his life, the guy was unaware of other aspects. After his return to the human world, a huge sect was formed in honor of the hero. Adepts believed in his divine origin and supernatural abilities. Their leader claimed that following Johnny's path would guarantee them salvation. People saw supernatural properties even in images of idols. After completing the avatar synchronization, Colin and Johnny saw a crowd outside their house. When the adepts saw the object of worship, they immediately began chanting its name. Unlike the guy, the national team coach knew John's sect well and told him a little about it. It turned out that there were many slightly inadequate people who considered the commander to be God, and they followed the guy wherever he went, along with a crowd of reporters. The leader of the Savior Squad was supposed to show them the way to survival in a dying world. Everything Johnny heard irritated the warrior beyond measure. He set himself the goal of immediately showing them the obvious path, away from him. The guy jumped off the balcony of the house before Colin could stop him. But despite attempts to silence his followers, they glorified his name even more. Finally, with great effort, silence reigned around the house. The warrior announced that despite all the beliefs about his personality, all members of the sect should leave him alone and forget the way to this house. To cement the result, the guy even began threatening those present with violence. But the crowd perceived this as punishment for wrongdoing. Therefore, with even greater determination, they began to beg the idol for mercy. Sick people were impossible to convince. Johnny had just learned that for himself, which made me completely lose self-control. A few minutes later, everyone who had gathered outside Colin's house was lying on the ground unconscious. The leader of the rescue squad felt sorry only for the child, who, through his own naivety, had fallen into a bad environment. After the sect members were finished, it was possible to return to the training of the master of the house. The national team coach considered this a pointless waste of energy, which, moreover, in the future, could provoke an even greater surge of interest in Johnny. But the guy was adamant he was satisfied with his own methods of solving problems. While the comrades were arguing, the head of the hero cult watched them from afar. At some point, the leader of the rescue squad noticed a foreign object, but the unknown person immediately disappeared, using a dark aura to do so. Finally, the last week of preparation passed, and guests began to flock to Korea's main airport. Among them were well-known association agents, including Joe Pellman. He cherished the hope of successful recruiting. It is not often that legendary personalities return to life. For others, such hope seemed dubious, because only Catherine once briefly agreed to participate in the games. But the man didn't listen to anyone. He couldn't miss a good chance to make money. But Joe wasn't the only one with interesting ideas. A competitor from Europe appeared in the airport lobby, Jack Rand. While men played pre-formed roles in front of each other, reporters paid attention to the newcomers. These were the Moreau brothers, presidents of the Paris Lumiere Club, who wanted to see Johnny in their cast. But the legend's refusal wouldn't be a disaster for them, and the fan base could satisfy them. Seeing each other, the men stopped, the common goal giving rise to competition. Suddenly, even the sounds of the cameras disappeared somewhere. Everyone turned to the door, through which a long-haired woman walked silently. The youngest member of the rescue squad, Catherine, smiled mysteriously, looking around the lobby. A huge crowd formed near the stadium where the games were to be held. These were people who simply couldn't buy tickets due to lack of seats. Those who remained on the street waited for the arrival of the South Korean national team. And then, a few minutes later, Johnny and Colin stepped out onto the red carpet as their own personas. The guy was in good health and spirits, anticipating a busy day. When journalists saw the main person of the day, they immediately rushed to interview him. They rushed towards the leader of the rescue squad like a herd of horses. Colin, realizing that society's attention is focused on his friend, technically he removed himself from the situation, which angered his commander. But it was thanks to the interviewers that the guy learned about Catherine's presence among the audience. He hadn't seen the girl since the last battle and was surprised by her visit, especially since she seemed to be telling everyone around her about her seniority. Having finished the conversation, Johnny resolutely headed for the locker room. Ignoring those present, the boy quickly moved towards Colin. Seeing his friend, the hero immediately reported Catherine's sudden arrival. The news was also appreciated by Rihanna, who of course was with her father. Logical questions arose about this because they were by no means friends. The girl came from a wealthy Chinese family, and although she had good potential, she was too lazy to spend time training because of her status. She always disliked Johnny's leadership and his constant pressure, and the boy was annoyed by Catherine's arrogance and refusal to obey. The girl always relied on her aura, disregarding all the rules of combat. Almost every second, she heard some kind of insult from the commander. Therefore, Catherine's arrival now looked like part of a planned revenge. But that wasn't as important as discussing battle strategy. Colin announced the arrival of new players and a slight change to the rules. All the athletes present in the room were to be divided into two teams. Team Love and Team Hope were to meet in a charity match. The first will include all players from the South Korean national team, and in the second, newcomers and Rihanna. Colin appointed himself the leader of the Hope team, but no one thought to argue. Johnny saw how the coach was practicing his public speaking skills. Therefore, I could not even think about anyone else taking this position. The guy looked at the members of his team with an analytical look. Of course, the favorites were Colin and Rihanna, but among the rest, the hero was able to find a potential treasure. The boy standing nearby, clapping his hands enthusiastically, had good results. Skills and aura concentration and inner strength could come in handy. The guy was a potential tank, so it had to be dealt with immediately. The frightened young man introduced himself as Thomas and announced his position in the group. He was engaged in close combat, which was completely out of his league. The guy said he was hired for this position because of his lack of talent in tanking. Basically, because of this, he still didn't know half of his abilities without even realizing it. Looking at Thomas, Johnny understood how he was selected for the team. The further along, the more convinced the hero was that he was the only one who could see the potential. He handed the young man the shield and informed him that from now on it was his artifact. Due to lack of time, the leader of the rescuers quickly explained the basic movements in the tank position. Defense attack. But he stunned Thomas with the news of a change in position. The players gathered around were no less shocked. It looked like sheer stupidity. But to the surprise of those present, Colin did not object to the decision made. On the contrary, he even approved of it. Once the technicalities were sorted out, it was time to try on the costumes. Despite its light weight, this armor was very strong. In addition, as a bonus, the national team coach prepared a surprise for Johnny. He ordered a perfectly balanced spear for the hero, which was very similar to an artifact from the past. It's time to start the game. The spectators screamed wildly, paying homage to their idols. Team Love and Team Hope lined up in two columns and headed to the arena. Thanks to Colin's efforts, it was possible to select newcomers with a rank equivalent to the national team. Johnny studied the personalities of his opponents with interest. Finally, his eye fell on a blonde, arrogant boy. Despite his good characteristics, the ignoramus had almost no willpower, so his participation in the national team was 100% approved due to family ties. Last time, during a duel with the Americans, he threw himself into the hero's eye. But now, the leader of the rescue squad had a chance to teach the young man a lesson. Thus, two audacities met, but only one was backed by true skill. Johnny took any remark in his direction with a laugh. The young man was truly an ignorant major who had no idea who he was actually talking to. To back up his suspicions with facts, the warrior asked about his interlocutor's father. It turned out that it was about the vice president of the association. This became additional motivation for Johnny to destroy the opposing team. When the leader of the rescue squad entered the arena, his name was chanted, literally, by everyone around him. An extraordinary event took place both for South Korea and for the entire world. No one knew what to expect from the upcoming battle, but the spectacle promised to be interesting. Special guests were also present in the VIP stands, including recruiters and Gerald Walker. The Murrow brothers and Catherine kept their eyes on Johnny. The location of the Aja's caves was chosen for the first round. This system was a spiral with a secret path to the dungeon, which was guarded by various monsters. At the pre-match briefing, Colin had already discussed in detail the next steps. They had to start hunting and scavenging from their starting area, and at some point Johnny had to deal with the boss of the dungeon, the Serpent, a giant snake. After the main monster was destroyed, the dungeon was supposed to close for a while. During this time, the rest of the team had to move to the inner circle and face the opponent. Colin, his daughter, and Johnny promised to ensure the integrity of the rest and destroy the Love team. Although this strategy seemed too long to the leader of the rescue squad, he did not argue. With the help of technicians, the players found themselves in the starting sector of the location. The national team coach ordered everyone to take their positions. A frightened Thomas held himself close to Johnny as possible, constantly nervous in his new role. The first spiders quickly found their prey and immediately attacked. At the same moment, the same thing was happening at the starting point of the love team. The brazen brawler burned the monsters with flames, keeping his distance. Of course, arthropods reacted poorly to fire. Adam, that was the young man's name, was nervous only because of their number. And he was also annoyed by the image of the all-powerful Johnny, whose achievements were long gone. Due to constant thoughts about their short-lived argument, the Major was losing control of himself. Destroying the monsters around him, he barely had time to think about his brothers. Adam couldn't wait to meet his new enemy face to face. He wanted a vendetta. Meanwhile, on the other side of the map, Colin and Johnny were working in tandem. Their movements were clear and coordinated. While one was hedging, the other was deftly attacking, leaving no chance for his opponents. Despite the 17-year pause, Colin felt as if time had stopped for him and his commander. The man understood when to retreat or provide assistance and knew that he had reliable rear. But the audience was incredibly excited because it was the first time they saw their friends work in person. The rescuers skillfully destroyed the crowd of spiders, which seemed endless. In the end, one area of the caves was cleared only thanks to the efforts of these two warriors. Thomas finally began to feel his limbs, which had gone numb with fear. He wanted to take an active part, despite his new role on the team. Johnny noticed that even with such significant changes, the young man acted quite confidently and effectively. In the heat of battle, Thomas decided to use his aura skill a little differently, spreading it across a shield. He didn't know if concentration would help, but there was no choice. The boy attacked the spider, and to his surprise so far, everything was working out as it should. During defense, the young man managed to reduce the damage from the enemy's attacks by concentrating. The effect was so striking that Johnny paused for a moment to take a better look. He praised himself for not making a mistake in his own choice. The brazen spider, which tried to attack the hero from behind, was eventually repelled. The leader of the rescue squad used his signature meter attack. This caused incredible delight among the French brothers, and Catherine, who was sitting next to him, only frowned even more. She knew very well what this technique was. Despite the use of superpowers, Johnny looked like he wasn't doing anything special at the time. It was impossible to evade this powerful technique, and now, despite 17 years of absence, it turned out that the hero had not lost his grip. It seemed like he was playing around in the arena, not taking the situation seriously. When the enemy around them was destroyed, Colin called a new meeting to discuss next steps. But to his surprise, Johnny was no longer among the players. It turned out that the leader of the rescue squad had already set out to destroy the dungeon boss. It was necessary to save face, so the national team coach called this decision the right one. Based on the new data, it was necessary to go to clear the next location. Meanwhile, the serpent again met face to face with the glorious warrior who had once destroyed him. And although the snake looked quite powerful, this time it was going to die just as well. The main battle of the dungeon has begun, the ending of which surprised even Johnny himself. The boy managed to kill the monster with one blow of his spear. Because of this, the hero had to wait for the rest of the team at the specified location, and they were incredibly surprised to see the leader of the rescue squad in front of them, especially considering that Johnny was sitting on the remains of a snake he had killed on his own. While waiting for the team, the hero had time to consider his next steps. He called upon Rihanna and Colin as his assistants, stating that the three of them are in for a busy short trip. While the rest of the Hope team was busy increasing their own combat aura, the three main members were heading to meet the opposing team. Colin was a little nervous about his comrade's silent stance, so the man decided to figure out a plan of action, which it turns out was built solely on the idea of destroying an arrogant member of the love team. Johnny was quite happy with the frontal attack strategy. At this time, the national team completed the clearing of the next sector. During the time of destroying spiders and other small monsters, Adam managed to significantly increase the rank of his aura. He believed that this should be enough to destroy the legend of the past, but the young man's self-confidence almost cost him his life. The commander of the Love Squad repelled a surprise enemy attack in the face of the Major. It was a spear that could only belong to one person, Johnny. The opponents were approaching, so the members of the national team grouped together. At least they tried to do it in the meantime to avoid further attacks. Soon, other members of the Hope team arrived at the location, and the team found itself surrounded. Thomas was still nervous about his abilities. This was to be his first experience fighting a human. In the role of a tank, the guy had to be the first to attack. Meanwhile, Colin and Johnny were preparing for the march throw. The hero acted as a catapult for his comrade. To help the national team coach, the warrior threw his spear after him. Two simultaneous attacks confused the opponents, who did not know which flank to cover first. At first, they thought Adam was the target. The boy was seriously frightened by such a prospect. But it was a cunning plan, designed to dull attention and distract from the main thing. The real target was the opposing team's tanks. When the opponents realized this, it was already too late. Rihanna rushed to save her father from the clutches of angry enemies. With the deft movement of her whip, the girl moved Colin to the side of her comrades. The man ended up at Johnny's feet, who immediately seized the opportunity to mock him. Still, the years took their toll, and the national team coach needed help. All points of the plan have been implemented 100% so far. Now it was possible to fight, choosing your opponents on equal terms. The hero suggested that his comrades split up. Of course, he was looking after Adam for himself, who, in terror and rage, didn't know where to put himself. Commentators were delighted with the Hope Squad plan. It was a brilliant strategy. Rihanna and Colin, with Johnny's help, quickly launched an attack. The warrior in no hurry began to approach his opponent. But when Adam was about to attack, he suddenly realized that his opponent was already behind him. The blow was not long in coming. The leader of the rescue squad knocked the boy off his feet with one swing of his own shield. He didn't want to drag out the fight with the useless guy, so he immediately took up the spear. The rest of the love team was still surrounded by the Hope Squad. Among them was the leader of the national team, who was incredibly saddened by the statistics of the team's deaths. He hoped to crush his opponents with collective pressure, and for his first attack he chose Thomas as his target. In a split second, the tank remembered all of Johnny's instructions regarding battle strategy. Enhancing the effect of his shield with aura, the young man managed to repel his opponent's attack quite well. After defending, Thomas immediately attacked, pushing his opponent away from him. The national team commander was unpleasantly impressed by the strength of the guy he seemed to know. But despite the opponent's power, it was clear that he felt insecure in his new role. Suddenly, in her most needed moment, the young man's new mentor came to his aid. Johnny praised Thomas for his almost exemplary efforts. Now the boy could rest, because experienced warriors had intervened in the fight. Sometime later, a charity meeting of the teams ended with the victory of the Hope Squad. The hero of the day was Colin, who was literally put on a pedestal of honor. In the locker room, the man was showered with joyful congratulations from all sides, which was incredibly flattering to him, considering the long practical break. And although the national team coach didn't tell anyone this, he understood well that the brilliant victory was only possible thanks to Johnny's efforts. Meanwhile, the hero himself observed an inexplicable trend of calls to honor the detachment of love. For the second round, it was decided to choose a more difficult location with strong gravity. The Labyrinth of Death was considered one of the most difficult dungeons. The only person who managed to clear it was Johnny. So this time, high hopes were placed on the hero. The warrior himself wasn't too bothered by the change of scenery. Most of all, he was fed up with the company of fools. Ever since he found himself among the living again, the boy had been unable to find peace alone with himself. There was always someone messing with Johnny's feet, preventing him from living the life he dreamed of. So today, the guy decided to show the real game that the crowd was so demanding. But this time, there was no talk of the team participating at all. At the starting point, Colin, as usual, announced a small meeting. He wanted to discuss the next steps and encourage people. But Johnny interrupted his speech, emphasizing that he would overcome all obstacles on his own. The national team coach was surprised by his teammates' confidence. But the thing was that not much time had passed for the hero since the first playthrough. He remembered all the nuances well and wanted to play with his new prey alone, especially since I already understood with almost 100% certainty where my opponents might be hiding. Colin had no choice but to agree with his friend's decision and convince the team of his loyalty. Johnny flew at full speed to the national team representatives, avoiding dangerous areas. The guy met his first opponents very soon. It was an average runny nose. The warrior was happy to break bones on such easy targets. A few seconds later, a quick fight broke out, in which, of course, the winner was the leader of the rescue squad. After only parts of the armor remained from the squad of skeletons, Johnny ran on. Although not much time had passed for him, changes were felt everywhere. For 18 years, gravity has been building its power here and has increased more than tenfold. However, for his level of development, this was not a significant problem, unlike beginners. Thanks to his own experience, the hero knew how to adapt to any conditions. And this time, using accelerated freefall, he was already near his opponent. Johnny landed next to the love team when they least expected it. The members of the national team did not understand how the opponent could be here so quickly. The leader of the rescue squad did not hide the fact that he had foreseen all the enemy's moves in advance. He wanted to end them on his own terms, and it had to happen now. After a literal declaration of war, the commander of the love squad ordered an attack on the enemy. He couldn't believe that a warrior could come alone without reinforcements, so he emphasized caution. The opponents regrouped in motion and scattered in different directions, awaiting the attack of the remaining enemies. It was a good move, but it only prolonged their existence a little in Johnny's eyes. Thanks to his analytical gaze, the guy easily calculated the desired target. Finding one of the strongest members of the squad, he killed him with a spear. After destroying a team member, the rest hurried to disappear from the hero's sight. Johnny assessed the situation with a smile and decided to track them from the upper tier. The love team ran about 2 kilometers until it was decided that the enemy had lost them. The members of the national team assured their commander that the right strategy was to attack, but he doubted it. The guy believed that caution should come first. Meanwhile, Johnny had already found his target. Although he couldn't see the players directly, he still felt like they were down below. Having made his bet, the leader of the rescue squad prepared to throw. He activated his superpower and used it to control the spear. A moment later, the artifact flew down, charged with a blue aura. The weapon easily bypassed obstacles, just like its owner had done a few dozen minutes earlier. Weighted down by the gravity of the dungeon, the spear made a terrible humming sound in flight, which greatly surprised the love team, who couldn't understand where all the noise was coming from. When everything became clear, it was already too late. The squad was 1 member short. Shocked, the commander looked at the weapon. He could not understand how the enemy managed to do this. The commentators momentarily forgot that they were supposed to tell the audience everything that was happening on the screen. Just then, while at a great distance from his opponents, Johnny committed his second murder. The second round of charity fights became increasingly interesting and exciting. Having recovered from the initial shock, Adam began to win the team over to his side. The guy emphasized the need to unite and attack the opponent. But the team leader was against any radical actions. A split was brewing in the love squad, which the leader of the saviors was closely watching from a height. Eventually, Adam got tired of arguing and announced that he would deal with the enemy on his own. He turned back and, activating his aura, threw a fiery sphere towards Johnny. Upon reaching the upper tier, the fiery layer caused a powerful explosion. Based on the power of the attack, the young man thought he had dealt with his opponent with 1 blow. But the taste of victory instantly disappeared as the smoke cleared. The leader of the rescue squad was completely unharmed. Moreover, the guy noticed that he himself allowed himself to be attacked. After promising a quick response, Johnny instantly disappeared from sight. After this event, the love team realized that they were in big trouble. By order of their leader, the fighters divided into 2 groups, one of which was to hunt the hero. They hoped to overcome him through numerical superiority and the strengthening of their own auras. Commentators predicted that the national team had a plan, but did not consider it viable. Against such a powerful monster, even in full force, they could prove powerless. As if by magic, Johnny found himself above one of the pens. He attacked the guys who, due to surprise, did not have time to build a decent defense. And although they were some of the strongest members of the enemy team, their deeds turned out to be bad. The leader of the rescue squad scattered them in different directions like defenseless puppies. The love team was dwindling. The hero's spear found its targets wherever they were hiding. When the last representative of the opponents remained, there was a short pause. The guy was an archer and knew perfectly well that he was completely powerless against Johnny. Therefore, instead of fighting to the end, the young man decided to run away. But the warrior's weapon found him halfway to salvation. The number of enemies had decreased by 5 people. Johnny planned to deal with the rest even faster. The spectators in the arena could not believe their eyes. It was the first time they had seen such a game. Even experienced superhumans and recruiters refrained from commenting. In contrast to their French brothers who were fanatical about their idol, Catherine was blacker than a storm cloud. Something she never expected happened. Her hated commander really did return. The search for the rest of the love team was interrupted by a call from Colin, who was trying to clarify the situation. After hearing his comrade's brief report, the man promised to join soon. But Johnny assured me that he would do just fine on his own, and there was no need to rush. A few minutes passed, and the hero really found his prey. Now his aura changed from blue to red, signifying an increase in strength. Despite all the danger, there was no choice. The leader of the love team gave the order to fight. The group quickly split into pairs and surrounded their opponent. The players came in from both flanks at the same time. And in the end, Johnny found himself in a kind of triangle. He was not against some complications. Most likely, he was facing a battle with all his opponents at once. Therefore, the entrance went analytical vision. The hero saw what indicators each of the attackers had, and immediately hit the weak points. Any resistance, even worthy ones, ran up against, literally, a stone wall. The guy eliminated his first opponent in less than 2 minutes. Realizing that the situation was escalating, the commander ordered Adam to use flamethrowers. The young man caused a powerful explosion with Johnny at the epicenter. The rest of the team rushed to the attack to finish off the opponent if he was still alive, but no one was visible in that direction. At some point, the hero seemed to materialize out of nowhere in front of one of the enemies and attacked him with a spear. There wasn't a single scratch on it, which was impressive. A person who was considered an artifact of the past turned out to be a role model for the entire planet. The enemies didn't have time to blink an eye, and they already lost another one of their members. Thus, a 2-against-1 situation was created. Adam subconsciously, without control of his own body, began to step back. Johnny, of course, chose the commander of the Love Squad as his first target. He didn't have time to understand anything at all and was already out of the game. For dessert, the frightened major was left, unable to find a place for himself. It turns out that Adam was only brave in the company of like-minded people. There was no talk of any battle. Johnny eliminated the little scoundrel with one blow. The arena erupted in screams. The commentators finally lost their self-control. It was a grand gain without any loss, accomplished at the expense of one person. The leader of the rescue squad became a real star of the games. The entire arena was chanting his name, and the guy was only interested in the drone flying above him. It was the first time he had seen such a device, so Colin explained to the commander what it was. Finding out that the broadcast was being broadcast live, Johnny allowed himself some childish fun. The national team coach could not allow his friend to shame them in front of the entire country, so I decisively pulled him towards the locker rooms. Within minutes, the guys were already giving interviews at an impromptu press conference. All journalists competed to celebrate the team hero's significant contribution on the playing field. They wondered if the idea of a one-on-one game in the second round was Colin's. But he honestly replied that he simply trusted his comrades' intuition and his combat experience. Having dealt with the questions to the national team coach, all attention was focused on Johnny. The guy immediately said that he liked the similarity of the games to real dungeon battles. Although he had to get used to it a bit in the first round, in the second, he showed everything he wanted. Journalists were interested in the hero's opinion about the opposing team, and this made him think. The warrior said that the national team had two problems: the blindness of the coach and the incompetence of the leader. As for the rest of the players, the conclusions were also disappointing. But finally, Johnny cryptically hinted at future changes in the country's gaming world. Already sitting in the car, Colin decided to ask what exactly his friend meant when he spoke about the future. It was a very mysterious phrase that prompted various thoughts. It could be assumed that the boy became interested in participating in games. Everything turned out to be more practical. The hero did not like the coach's poor work and lack of foresight. Once he also expressed a desire to train warriors into a team, but turned out to be a more talented leader. Another member of the rescue squad, Oliver, who now also worked as a trainer, followed in their footsteps. Colin jokingly noted that if the commander has the desire, he should agree to coach the team himself. He, of course, refused such a generous offer, but he agreed to give free, effective advice regarding the players. Johnny wanted Colin to take Thomas to the main team in a tank, and he used the leader of the national team as a second tank, relying on his abilities. The comrade's main demand was to expel Adam from the cast. Of course, this caused considerable indignation among the coach, although the man immediately noted that this was not at all because of the young man's influential parents. It was Adam's powerful aura which Colin didn't want to give up. Even Johnny's argument about low willpower didn't seem convincing to the coach. After a short dispute, everything was decided in favor of the hero. The warrior was always good at predicting the abilities of superhumans, and this could not be ignored. They weren't going home. After the game, there was an agreement to have a grand celebration. At Hunter's Hotels, the association president has fully booked an expensive restaurant for such purposes. Rihanna was already waiting for her friends there, and she happily rushed to meet her father. Not even a minute passed, and the girl already managed to tell me which alcohol was the tastiest here, which made his uncle incredibly interested. So Colin hurried to leave them alone. The boy and girl were talking as if there was no one else in the room, but there were many eyes watching Johnny from all sides. Joe Pellman was one of those who wanted to chat with the star of the day. While the recruiter was considering a strategy, a more agile competitor managed to beat him. The man, Jack Rand, wanted to get the best player in the world at any cost. And although their conversation was quite brief, it left Joe Pellman incredibly unsettled. The man perfectly understood the world of competition and hated when prey escaped from under his nose, especially someone like Johnny, an incredible person who returned from the other world. Jack handed the guy his business card, hoping that he would consider his offer as soon as possible. Most of all, Rihanna was shocked by the situation, as she had no idea that the hero knew languages. It was said so wittily that it amused Johnny. Behind Rand, the Morrow brothers joined the queue at full speed. They, interrupting each other, asked for the attention of the majestic warrior. He easily began to communicate with the businessmen in their native French. Rihanna explained that they owned the most prestigious French gaming club, Lumière, which included powerful players, including world number 1, Nathan Bernard. After listening to the explanation, the boy decided that these two had also come to persuade him to sign the contract. But to Johnny's surprise, they announced that they had come to propose to the girl standing nearby. It came like a bolt from the blue. Even Ree knew it was about her. The Lumière Club was an incredible boost in Colleen's daughter's career. This happened thanks to Johnny's brilliant vision, who was able to develop the necessary skills in the girl. Of course, he was also a desirable target, but the Morrow brothers did not want to force the hero. In this case, everything depended solely on his own initiative, for which they were willing to pay handsomely. Johnny's promise to think about it was met with incredible enthusiasm. None of the French hid that the warrior was their idol. They even promised to send him a weapon made especially for him. Having finished the conversation, the Morrow brothers disappeared from sight as quickly as they had appeared. Tired of endless chatter with strangers, Johnny was eager to go home. He wanted to watch his favorite drama. But halfway there, the boy was stopped by the voice of a respectable-looking man. The man introduced himself as the secretary of the Blue House. He was involved in the bounty system that was established to provide for superhumans after the war ended. According to the rules, the man had to give the boy money for all 17 years of absence. The monthly maintenance of the members of the first-level rescue squad was 12 million. Over the years of his absence, Johnny's account had accumulated 2.5 billion. This news was like balm for the soul of the hero who had felt completely unfulfilled since the day he returned. Finally, he could breathe deeply without feeling obligated to anyone. Johnny's thoughts and conscientious calculations were interrupted by the appearance of Joe Pellman. The boy did not take the new, unfamiliar figure next to him very happily, but the recruiter insisted, adding that he would not tire the leader of the rescue squad with long speeches. His main message was that he understood Johnny's moral vacillations since his resurrection. The man emphasized that he did not persuade the boy to make a decision again. He is ready to wait for him to find his way in a new, peaceful world. The recruiter concluded his emotional speech with his business card, promising to wait for the call. Although Johnny didn't admit it to Ree, he was truly touched by this brief conversation. This was the only person who at least pretended to care about his identity. In addition, according to Rihanna, Joe was the best agent in the gaming world. The man was the key to gigantic money. The trip home was delayed because of the start of the evening show. From the stage, the host announced his gratitude to Johnny for the largest donation to the underprivileged. The guy paid this amount thanks to the fee he received from the charity game. Of course, this was not done by him personally because the hero did not even know how much money he had. Michael, who was standing at the podium, unashamedly shouted that Johnny had about 2 trillion. The guy even felt a little embarrassed when he heard this gigantic amount. He couldn't believe that in one day he had gone from being a homeless man living with a friend to being rich again. When the hero said this out loud, everyone around him laughed. But for some reason, this prompted the warrior to be frank. He wanted to talk about the past. The leader of the rescue squad did not believe that he had done anything extraordinary for the world. He always fought because he simply loved to do it, not to save people. And today, in a peaceful world, I felt like I had lost the cause of my whole life. I felt lost and secretly wished for the good old days to return. But participating in charity games allowed the hero to find meaning in today's day. He liked that thanks to the winnings, children in need would receive help. For a boy who grew up in such a poor environment, it was extremely important to bring goodness into the world. When Johnny came down from the podium, Michael was already waiting for him there. At first, the men had a short conversation with sarcastic overtones, but in the end, the president of the association offered the soldier a job. He reminded Johnny of his anti-authoritarian behavior, which made all superhumans considered dangerous. The guy didn't take anyone into account if he didn't like something back in the day, but based on what had been built over the years, it was necessary to go further. Therefore, the hero's coaching talent could be applied to the national team. But with the advent of a large sum of money, Johnny had other plans for this account. He wanted to create his own team of cool players and revive Korea's glory. But the main motive, of course, was the money that could be earned from this business. Colin was incredibly surprised by the determination he heard from his friend. He immediately explained all the problems that could arise with this, including the costs. But this only seemed to encourage the former commander more. He had already decided that he would challenge the whole world, and there was no stopping him. When Colin and Johnny drove up to the house, they saw an unexpected guest. Catherine stood silently on the street corner. It was unclear what exactly she wanted. Recalling their shared history, the hero thought that the woman wanted revenge. She slowly approached her former colleagues. At this time, Johnny decided to check her performance by analyzing her eyes. But he was impressed by the incredible development of the girl's abilities. The silence dragged on, so the hero broke it first, asking about the purpose of Catherine's visit. They exchanged a couple of sentences, from which, however, the guy was unable to understand the mood of his interlocutor. She even managed to smile a few times. After carefully examining the resurrected leader, the woman walked away, saying she just wanted to make sure he was real. She was not going to open her soul to men. All these years, Catherine remembered well the day Johnny saved her life. Due to constant quarrels with the commander, she was always in tears. The girl even wanted to leave the squad, but the monster stood in the way. From the fright and outrage she felt at that moment, Catherine was unable to concentrate, which made me realize she had no chance of survival. At the last second before the monster struck, the commander saved her. It seemed that it was at this moment that the girl was able to see Johnny for the first time. That day instilled in her heart a love and gratitude that she carried through the years. And now, when Catherine saw the hero in person, her heart rapidly changed its rhythm. The next morning, Johnny immediately checked his account. He was delighted with what he saw. The plan to acquire the club from now on occupied all of the hero's thoughts. Colin couldn't stand to watch his friend waste money, so he volunteered to help. He explained what clubs and leagues there are and what Johnny definitely doesn't have enough money for. There were regular leagues for 11 players and reduced leagues for 7, which were accordingly cheaper. The friends agreed that the hero would acquire a team of 11 warriors. In order not to stir his brains, Johnny decided to contact Michael immediately. The president of the association was delighted that someone would relieve him of one of his burdens. The man reported that there were 3 teams available for sale today. He advised the leader of the rescue squad to personally come to the candidates' game, which would be held today. Covering his face with everything he could, Johnny crossed the threshold of the arena. It seemed like everyone in the audience was rooting for the team that Michael had encouraged him to buy. But the hero did not want to succumb to the opinions of others on this issue. The guy's plans were to look at the participating teams with an impartial eye. First, the members of the outlaw team came under scrutiny. As it turned out, there was also someone to look at. Among the team members were those who had well-developed indicators and those who had interesting skills. But of course, Johnny found players there who didn't fit their positions. Under sensitive leadership with a few guys, it was possible after some time to go into real battle. The hero was also impressed by the performance of the girl on the bench. At first, he didn't even realize that she hadn't forgotten the main part. The red-haired girl, in addition, had a very strange, long jumping skill. It was the first time he had seen something like this. But still, thanks to his spatial imagination, he realized that it was possible to work with it. Johnny sat out until the very end of the duel in which the outlaws blew it. But this did not at all upset the leader of the rescue squad. After finishing, he immediately called the president of the association and broke the news. The ownership papers for the outlaw team were signed the next morning. This news spread throughout the country. Johnny's fans didn't understand why he needed coaching. They wanted to see him in the arena. Despite the media hype and Michael's obvious joy, the hero was pleased with his new purchase. In addition to the team, the guy decided to buy himself a vehicle for ease of movement. The leader of the rescue squad preferred fast travel, so the motorcycle became a favorite. Since Johnny had become immortal upon his return, he wasn't particularly concerned about safety, and it was noticeable because he traveled along expressways, even without a helmet, annoying drivers. But when they managed to see the motorcyclist's face, they immediately lost their ability to get angry. The savior of humanity was forgiven absolutely everything, because according to most, he was not inclined to hurt anyone. After clarifying all the technical aspects, the new owner came to visit the club. At first glance, it became clear that there were no rich people among the members. But the main thing was not the cover, but what was inside. A man quickly approached Johnny, introducing himself as the team's coach, and greeted him politely. With the help of an analyzing gaze, the hero realized that a Superman was standing before him. In addition, the coach Ben had good performance to work with. The new owner was given a detailed tour of the grounds and building. Ben explained that there were 14 players in the club. But despite this, the equipment in the building was only for 11 people. The coach explained that this was due to a lack of funds, but Johnny didn't see it as a problem. When the tour ended, the leader of the rescue squad finally made up his mind about this place. The situation was satisfactory. so it was time to get to know each of the players in person. The new owner settled into the living room, waiting for the young men and women to arrive. The first to arrive was a red-headed girl from the bench. Her name was Lindsay. After a few seconds of conversation, Johnny found out that she practiced bow hunting in her free time. Not to waste any time, the hero immediately explained his position regarding his vision of her role in the team. He didn't start on a positive note, so Lindsay thought she was being excluded, but the opposite happened. The leader of the rescue squad wanted to make her the main character, the angel of the team. With the girl's speed, it was possible to destroy the enemy with exhausting maneuvers. But when Johnny said out loud that he wanted to change Lindsay's role, she didn't believe it. She has already built a realistic dialogue about exclusion in her head. But the new chairman really wanted to do as he said. And although the new angel didn't believe in herself, she wanted to confide in Johnny, because she felt like an absolute failure when it came to bow training. The hero noticed another talent. Lindsay could run fast, and that could be used. To develop this skill even further, the boy insisted on its regular and conscientious training. She was to become an elusive threat that could strike suddenly and not be caught. The girl listened to Johnny with her mouth open. Before that, no one could see in her a talent for fighting. And here she was offered a leading position in the team and was predicted to join the national team. Lindsay felt incredible happiness, probably the greatest in her entire life. She was not hopeless, especially since the club owner gave her his word on condition of conscientious training. She couldn't stand still and started jumping for joy. Johnny was next visited by one of those gifted boys he had noticed in the arena. The young man's name was Charlie, and he currently held the position of support on the team. In addition, he was distinguished by his lean physique and pedantic character, but his hero was able to throw him off balance from the first seconds. The warrior announced that from now on, Charlie was changing his position, but he in response started arguing about this again. But it was impossible to resist the indicators that Johnny had carefully examined. Therefore, the new owner of the club, according to his own vision, approved him for the position of main director. The leader of the rescue squad saw in the young man talents for close combat and sword play. Charlie tried to appeal to his own poor strength and agility, but according to Johnny, this situation arose because the guy always avoided fights. The hero generally didn't like having support players on the team who stayed on the back flank. Usually such team members were like extra ballast. He wanted to take Charlie to the next level. Now the young man's responsibilities will include the use of two skills, support and battle. Moreover, fighting will be the main task, and support will be provided as needed. During this long conversation, which periodically turned into an argument, Johnny became very tired. He was tired of proving his point of view to a no-name, albeit a promising one. Therefore, the leader of the rescue squad offered a choice, either leave or accept new conditions. Of course, the answer to such a proposal was obvious. The young man agreed and left the lounge. When the meeting with the players ended, Johnny asked Ben to find another coach. Charlie and Lindsay needed to be trained for their new positions. And although everyone around him questioned his decision, the hero was confident in their complete loyalty. After giving his final instructions, the leader of the rescue squad left the building. Already on the street, the guy remembered the name of the club, which he absolutely did not like. It was necessary to think of a new creative name. The next day, Johnny was completely immersed in his own thoughts, forgetting even about the dramas. Colin initially thought his friend was sick and went over to ask how he was doing. But the matter turned out to be in the team over whose composition the hero was deliberating. It was necessary to expand the warehouse because otherwise there would be no way to fill the existing gaps. This matter should have been dealt with immediately, and the only productive solution to this issue was to involve the media, which was waiting at the gate. Before approaching them, the leader of the rescue squad called Ben and told him about his plans. For the coach, everything came down to money, which was no problem for Johnny. Of course, the hero was ready to equip the club with everything necessary for newcomers. The casting had to be completed in 3 days, so they both had a lot of work to do. After finishing his conversation with Ben, the warrior went outside the fence to the journalists. They were impressed by the good mood of the object of their observation, especially when the guy opened his mouth and started a normal small talk. He agreed to give an interview to anyone now, but instead asked for help for himself. Johnny wanted all the newspapers to publish notices about recruiting candidates for his club. The next morning, it became obvious that the rescue squad leader's plan had worked. The lawless received a multitude of questionnaires, which now needed to be examined in detail. And although the hero was hoping for several thousand people, it turned out that there were almost 100,000 of them. The number of people interested was impressive. Johnny was already hurrying to the club to get to know them in detail. The guy did it as fast as he could. Although all superhumans underwent the same test that the leader of the Savior Squad was forced to undergo, the indicators and the questionnaires told the soldier nothing. The potential of each candidate could be determined much faster thanks to the visual component. And this really annoyed the new owner of the club. It was impossible to meet with all the candidates, so we had to do painstaking work. Suddenly, among a pile of papers, Johnny saw the application form of Tyler, a young man with telekinesis. And although his strength and agility were small, having such a rare skill made him valuable. The leader of the rescue squad announced his desire to meet with the guys. In a few hours, the warrior managed to select several candidates for interviews. The first of them turned out to be a sycophant. It turned out that he didn't see himself as a player at all, and he came to the club only to meet his idol. The young man didn't hear Johnny's refusals at all, as if he were deliberately getting into trouble. Nakaba began to appeal to his hero reputation and threatened publicity if he didn't get what he wanted, for which he was immediately hit in the head with a stapler. The soldier did not hold any negotiations with the blackmailers. The assistant coach had to carry the trickster out of the room in his arms. The next visitor was Tyler, who worked as an ordinary courier in real life. He greeted those present briefly and shyly. Ben didn't understand why Johnny would call such a weak candidate for an interview, because according to the indicators, there was nothing to talk about with the guy. But thanks to his analytical gaze, the hero saw something that was not indicated in the questionnaire. Tyler possessed telekinesis, visual telepathy, and aura transmission. 3 skills in one master were very rare, and the last power was extremely valued. Judging by the guy, he didn't even realize his full potential. But this could be worked on. In addition, Lindsay's age was almost the same as Tyler's, which made them perfect partners. Although the young man immediately admitted that he had no combat experience, he always dreamed of becoming part of the gaming community, a player to be emulated. For years, insecurity prevented Tyler from taking the first step, but the chance to join the legendary Warriors team was not to be missed. From today on, the young man decided that despite any obstacles, he would not give up on his cherished dream. Satisfied with this answer, Johnny moved on to the technicalities. He was interested in the specifics of the boy's strength and how well he wielded it. In the end, it turned out that Tyler's skill level was quite satisfactory, but like everyone else, the guy had to train hard to develop himself in all aspects. Finally, the perfect partner candidate for Lindsay was found. Johnny was incredibly happy with the unexpectedly high-quality find. He informed the young man of his verdict. The positive decision did not coincide with Ben's vision for this candidate, but the hero clearly saw that the tandem of a girl and a boy could have an extremely deadly effect. And the rest of the team, in the future, will only work to strengthen these two. In honor of the team renewal, it was decided to mark it with a small celebration. The newcomers got to know the members of the Outlaws Club better and the new owner. Meanwhile, Johnny watched them from afar, analyzing the mood in the team. The Warriors' thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of the team leader who decided to introduce himself. The guy's name was Sam, and he had the standard performance for a tank position. He wanted to express his sincere gratitude for all the efforts the hero made to develop the club, and he assured that all the players would work incredibly hard to live up to Johnny's expectations. The whole conversation was very open and sincere, which is why the leader of the rescue squad liked it. Nearby, the guy saw that Lindsay and Tyler had already found a common language. Therefore, the warrior decided to call them to him for a serious conversation. He asked the girl and the boy to understand each other well and practice fighting tricks together. Johnny was betting on them and didn't want to make a mistake due to the incompetence or laziness of the players. Inspired by the legend's teachings and their future role, the interlocutors promised to try their best. The main technical aspects have been resolved. All that remains is to put it into practice and to come up with a good name for the renewed club, because the outlaws simply could not become famous. After thinking about the problem for a while, Johnny chose one name from several options. Preparation for the first competition took about 3 months. The club's name was now YSM. In the locker room, the leader of the rescue squad was giving the team final instructions before the match. He didn't say anything special, just tried to give his charges a little self-confidence. The guy wanted them to have fun in their first fight. As both teams entered the arena, the start of the first round was announced. The location chosen was the Wizard Canyon Dungeon, an incredibly beautiful place. Johnny had high hopes for the team because 3 months ago, other players stood in front of him. And now, after all the effort, Lindsay and Tyler were extremely fast. Throughout the entire preparation phase, the guy had to pretend that he didn't know how such progress had happened. After the main players reached maximum speed, it was time to tackle the fighting style. Over the next 50 days, the girl mastered ingenious tricks that helped fool her opponents. No one was able to catch the clever brat if she didn't want to. And so today, after going through hellish training, the team took up their position in the dungeon. The girl was extremely nervous because it was her first time fighting a real opponent. Seeing this, the guys began to calm her down, giving examples from their own experience. But it was necessary to start acting, because they were being watched by their brilliant mentor and he couldn't be let down. Self-belief was the only thing that needed to be maintained within each of the players today. The YSM team regrouped and began implementing the previously discussed strategy. It seemed to the audience that the participants were not going to fight the monsters of the dungeon. They moved at lightning speed with a clearly defined goal. Having reached the peak point, almost near the enemy team, Johnny's squad for some reason stopped. Nobody understood what was happening. But at this time, Tyler was scanning the dungeon space, trying to find the opposing team. Using his telekinesis, the boy sent a signal that reflected off the walls and surfaces around him. And finally, after a few minutes, he managed to find people moving on the lower tier. There were only 4 players, so we had to hurry up and deal with them. Lindsay prepared for the march throw. A moment later, she was already soaring into the air, overcoming obstacles in her path. Other members of YSM at this time held agreed positions. The route taken by the girl very quickly led her to the enemy detachment. A fierce battle was taking place between them and the monsters of the dungeon. This was her chance to make things worse for her opponents, and it couldn't be ignored. Analyzing the behavior of the players in front of her, Lindsay realized that she could safely attack. Focused on the monsters in front of them, the young men did not even notice the enemy approaching from the flank. The angel's arrows first pierced the dragon's head. When the monster was destroyed, the fight as expected stopped. The guys assigned one of the squad members to deal with the impudent girl, and he immediately ran to carry out the order. Lindsay waited until the last moment, not moving from her spot, until the player approaches and tries to attack. She disappeared in an instant, leaving behind only astonishment. Once she was at a distance, the girl called out to the enemy and attacked the dragon again. Having made her move, she began to move away. The opponent couldn't let some brat make fun of him like that, so he decided to catch up. But all attempts were in vain. The guy was too slow. Lindsay continued to tease and didn't go far. Eventually, after several such shenanigans, the supply of arrows ran out. At this moment, Tyler entered the game. The guy teleported an extra quiver to the girl. All this time, the young man was looking for a safe place to settle down and read a book. And finally, the boy was able to lie down more comfortably and immerse himself in Johnny's interesting world. This behavior on the battlefield greatly angered the spectators. But this was exactly the effect Johnny had in mind 3 weeks ago. If Tyler is not actively involved in the fights, he was bound to cause mixed reactions. To prevent the young man from being reached by his enemies, Charlie was to guard him. This is exactly what was happening in the arena at that moment. Militant support defended the borders of the safe haven, while his friend remained completely relaxed and did not interfere with what was happening around him. Tyler's behavior was considered blasphemous and unworthy of national games by fans. But nevertheless, despite his feigned indifference, the boy performed his duties. What was happening in the dungeon was very amusing to Johnny. Mary, who came to support her comrade, realized that it was the hero who advised his people to do this. Indeed, the leader of the rescue squad knew his job. But despite this, Colin was in no hurry to fulfill his recent request regarding the national team. The woman did not know many details about her husband's work, so Johnny decided to talk to his former subordinate himself. While the boy and the woman were focused on other problems, a dangerous situation was developing in the arena. 6 members of the enemy team surrounded Lindsay. They had no idea that Tyler had been paving the way for her all this time. The girl maneuvered, confusing her opponents, who did not understand what was happening. And although the team angel was scared, she knew that by making an effort, she would have a decent future. They moved forward and backward, but still couldn't catch up with Lindsay. They were slow, although they ran forward with their last strength at the limit of their capabilities. In the end, eliminating the opponent became a matter of honor for the boys, and so the girl found herself surrounded by opponents on the edge of an abyss. In her opinion, it was all over. The cunning lightning was trapped. At first, Lindsay feigned surprise and fear to pass the time, but having received a signal from her comrades, her face immediately changed. She even started mocking the seemingly winners. The guys began to suspect that suspicious things were happening, and they were right. Suddenly, behind Lindsay on the flying island, members of her team took off. They quickly jumped down to the plateau next to their sister. The girl in turn smiled slyly at her opponents and prepared for a fight. Mary was amazed by the sight. This battle was absolutely unlike any other fight that had ever taken place in the history of the games. Johnny's trained players dealt with enemies with ease. The opponent's squad's help came too late, and the main part of the team was eliminated very quickly. In the first round, YSM defeated their opponents in a draw. This was the first victory of the comrades in the entire history of the club. Tyler and Lindsay became the heroes of the day. They instantly gained a huge army of fans, but the team's attention was focused on Johnny, and his strategy worked brilliantly. The guy fulfilled everything he promised them 3 months ago when he bought the Outlaw Club, and now the leader of the rescue squad was very proud of his charges, and they are incredibly happy about his presence in the life of the team. The clean victory irritated the opposing team. They didn't expect that former losers could play like that, but no one could do anything because everything was fair. New stars emerged in the galaxy of Korean teams that had to be reckoned with. But the trick with Tyler helped because of its unexpectedness. Very soon, the opponents could understand the scheme. The second round again ended in a victory for Johnny's team. The athletes from the stands thanked their mentor for the best guidance that led to glory. Many journalists immediately came out to Lindsay, and the girl began giving interviews. This led to the creation of a large number of fan clubs for the new star. Tyler was also noticed and ultimately appreciated for his efforts. The genius of the leader of the Saviors was confirmed despite his 17-year absence. A few days after the first match, Johnny finally spoke to Colin. The national team coach was curious about how his friend found such cool players, but he only joked in response. He preferred to discuss changes in the national team squad. Thomas, however, agreed to the new position of tank, but this caused great friction in the association. Colin blamed it on his inexperience. Hearing this from his friend, Johnny decided to take responsibility for it himself. But just in case, I decided to see if it was possible to lure the guy to my team. During the season, YSM managed to win 5 brilliant victories. Coach Ben was delighted with these results. Gathering at a festive meal with the team, he even shed a tear. Of course, the hero did not understand such emotions because he always won in everything. The guy understood that YSM was only at the beginning of their journey, and everything could change dramatically. Something had to be done to establish strong support for Tyler and Lindsay. Ben began to assure that all team members would do their best. Of course, the new owner of the club liked it, but a good indicator would be to achieve 50% wins by the end of the season. This was as much as 20% higher than the Lawless had ever achieved. The YSM leader listened carefully to the elders' conversation, analyzing the hero's behavior, and although he seemed to say unrealistic things, he could be trusted in his predictions. Mentally, the boy decided not to disappoint the legendary warrior and do everything in his power. A few minutes passed, and Johnny decided to make a toast. He promised that if he won half of the matches, he would start financing the club from his own pocket. This was a great motivation for those present. They could have a completely different life. After finishing his speech, the leader of the rescue squad said goodbye to the team. The guy didn't want to rest. He wanted to solve the problem of Tyler's safety. For these purposes, it was necessary to expand the cast and invite someone interesting. As Johnny thought about this, he unexpectedly received a message. Colin suggested that he take a closer look at the young superhumans and select, if possible, the worthy ones. This interested the hero, and he decided to start casting tomorrow. Indeed, at some point, opposing teams found a weak spot in Tyler's face. But Sam, the leader of YSM, stepped into the game, focusing on developing endurance and strength. This helped reduce the number of defeats. And in the end, the team was able to score more than 50% of victories for the season. When the games were over, Johnny came to select new players for the sports school. He didn't know who he was looking for, so he couldn't outline any boundaries to the local coach. The guy relied only on his own analytical vision. But no matter who the warrior looked at, he saw no worthy candidates. And those that were considered good were already booked by other recruiters. Of course, it was unfortunate, but we had to move forward. After scanning all the students, Johnny realized that he probably wouldn't find anything for himself here. The fact that the problem remained unresolved put incredible pressure on the psyche of the leader of the rescue squad. Suddenly, as he was about to leave, a boy burst into the gym. The coach struck up a conversation with the young man, from which it became clear that the boy was focusing on his studies. Meanwhile, the hero scanned the newcomer with an analyzing gaze. Finally, he had a nice surprise waiting for him that he could work with in the future. It turned out that none of the other teams wanted to take the young man to their team. It was a good opportunity because most likely the schoolboy would have given up on a career as a player. Therefore, Johnny offered the interlocutor a contract. Eddie, that was the boy's name, couldn't believe what he was hearing. The hero didn't even look at him in the act. He was unaware of the hidden abilities of the savior, who had already appreciated his shadow walk. This skill was exactly what YSM was lacking today. It seems that no one, and perhaps not even the young man himself, had any idea of such a treasure. Eddie stopped the other person in mid-sentence, refusing to believe it was true. Since Johnny couldn't tell the truth about his analytical abilities, he, as always, decided to lie. The boy was never allowed into the arena, so the hero decided to act on curiosity. He replied that for him, Eddie was a hidden treasure, and it was visible to the naked eye. But the schoolboy himself had a different opinion, considering himself unfit. He just didn't know how to use his abilities. Johnny promised his leadership in this matter in rapid development. Eddie simply had to move in the shadows to maximize his speed. But of course, such things had to be tested in practice. Despite all the flattering words about the student's talent, he still displayed his insecurities. But Johnny's charisma and his confidence in a glorious future soon captivated the young man. The hero offered a 2-year contract with the possibility of extension in case of successful cooperation. In order to obtain a positive result, the warrior promised to pay compensation in case of failure. The sum of 300 million quickly changed Eddie's mind. The guy wanted to tell his parents about the proposal, so Johnny volunteered to give him a ride. Riding a sports motorcycle was a new experience for the schoolboy. After some time, the contract was gladly signed by Eddie with the permission of the elders. Everyone was happy, especially the leader of the rescue squad. The success that the club owner achieved at the first school inspired him to new achievements. He thought that finding new people for YSM would be easy. But after the first victory, a series of failures began. There was no one left in any school worthy of attention or gifted, free from contracts. Johnny was disappointed with the results and angered by the cleverness of his competitors. Finally, the list that Colin gave him led the hero to the last educational institution. And although he found a worthy candidate there, new obstacles appeared. A guy who was a perfect fit for the team refused to become a player because he was doing it for a hobby. The school principal assured the rescue squad leader that he treated every agent this way. The guy had his own vision for the development of his life, despite the gigantic fees. He wanted to be a writer, considering yourself so brilliant as to bestow emotions on other people. In an unexpected way, Johnny found a way out of this story. He suggested that the schoolboy become the author of his updated biography. Given the popularity of the previous edition, this should be a bestseller. He even agreed to tell the boy about the battle at the gates of hell. Oliver happily agreed to this offer and signed the agreement. As he was saying goodbye, the young man asked about the strength of the YSM club chairman. He watched the charity match between the teams, and before that, many other battles. But I've never seen such a powerful aura from any of the players. Even the French with Nathan Bernard didn't look so impressively invincible. This begs the question of why Johnny is involved in coaching. Although the hero himself could take part in battles, he did not want to bully children, especially since the activities of the club chairman could bring him more money. After putting the finishing touches together, the hero called Colin and told him the news. He wanted, in all seriousness, to buy Thomas out for the team. Then the intermediate set of club members would be closed. To do this, you had to visit the 2-star Spirit Club. The leader of the rescue squad arrived at the designated location when it was already night outside. The guy was immediately stopped by the guards, who of course understood that they posed no threat. There was only one requirement. A conversation with the team coach, and the warrior did not want to hear any refusals. The territory of the 2-star Spirit Club was impressive. New buildings, landscape design. This was radically different in status from the YSM Club, although it had an impressive landscape. Halfway through, the club director met the guy and politely introduced himself. In fact, his goal was to calm the wayward Superman. But to be honest, he wasn't very good at this. Johnny insisted on talking to the coach about transferring one of the players. Of course, the director knew it was about Thomas because this gossip was being discussed everywhere. But he didn't want to substitute his subordinate and cause a physical conflict. Despite protests, the guy insisted on his point and literally forced me to show him the way. To Johnny's surprise, the coach was accompanied by a young man. Realizing that this looked like some kind of ambush, the leader of the rescue squad immediately got down to business. But the interlocutor's reaction was ambiguous. The man was behaving suspiciously, which led the guy to think that they were already acquaintances. And judging by the grimace on the coach's face after these words, this acquaintance was unpleasant. The boy behind the red mustache unexpectedly joined the conversation. It turned out that he was the captain of the 2-star Spirit team named Andrew. Suddenly, Johnny understood the reason for his presence in this room. They simply wanted to use the guy as a human shield during a possible fight. But it was necessary to find out the reason why the leader of the rescue squad was treated in this way. He racked his brain trying to remember situations from his past life, and the coach, wiping the sweat from his forehead, still distracted him instead of answering. And suddenly a memory flashed through Johnny's mind. It was a truly unpleasant story that could have had a fatal ending for the red-bearded man. The meeting took place in one of the dungeons. And when the hero said this out loud, the team coach froze in place. This man was an idiot who, while completing the task, just walked around underfoot. Johnny even admitted that he thought about his death after the battle was over. The coach began to beg for mercy. He himself remembered well that fateful meeting many years ago. 200 superhumans were recruited to traverse a dungeon filled with monsters and traps. Johnny was already popular as a promising young commander. But a brash, red-haired man named Dave had his own opinion on how the path should be paved. He treated the hero with disdain because of his age, and he wanted to promote his own strategy and manage people. In the end, everything happened according to his wishes, but many good warriors died because of it. and the stupid, impudent man himself was throwing himself into the jaws of death, not understanding it. He thought he could overcome any obstacle until he stepped on one of the traps. A pile of rocks flew at him from above, and Dave froze in terror, unable to move. The boy was saved by the help of a person he despised. This act, and in general, the events have remained frozen in the man's memory to this day. But the past had to be left in the past. Fighting after 20 years was completely pointless, especially since new reasons have emerged to teach the coach manners. There was no choice, and Dave asked the subordinate and the director to leave the office. The hero pointed out to the coach the mistakes in managing the team. He used his players ineffectively, and so today he had to pay for his treacherous behavior. It was Dave who first rejected Thomas's offer to change his position, and Johnny believed that the man did it on purpose, putting obstacles in his way. Trying to avoid reprisals, the coach of the two-star Spirit Club was ready to agree to anything, especially when I saw that the leader of the rescue squad wanted to tell the media about their story. Blackmail worked best for this person. The proposal to transfer Thomas to Johnny's team, although it outraged Dave, was already up for discussion. The man resisted the latter, but out of fear for his life and career, he was forced to agree. From that moment on, the bidding began, and of course, the coach raised the player's price tag to the maximum. But Johnny pressured him with his own authority and power, which is why Dave still agreed to 100 million. The interlocutors shook hands despite the fact that one of them had no face. Now the red-bearded man wanted only one thing, for the guest to leave the club as soon as possible, and preferably never come back here again. But the story of these two could not end so simply, because Johnny didn't forget past grievances so easily and was already planning revenge. A few days passed, and Thomas was already standing on the threshold of the YSM club. Now he could freely play in the tank position without any obstacles. The contract was signed for 5 years and had a good salary. Despite his great efforts and fruitful work, Johnny did not select the planned number of players. But now 3 new people have joined YSM. The hero was pondering this in Colin's living room when Rihanna walked in. The girl definitely needed something from her uncle, because she simply radiated goodwill and a desire to engage in dialogue. Suddenly, the hero saw a French dictionary in Rhee's hands, and everything became clear. The girl liked the offer from the Maraud brothers and was preparing to move to the French club. But Colin's daughter herself was afraid to go to Europe, which is why she needed Johnny's support. And although the leader of the rescue squad didn't like this idea, he couldn't refuse the beauty. A few days later, Jack Rand had already begun processing the paperwork for the girl's contract. All that remained was to pass the testing and put the final signatures directly in France. She had no idea that such active actions towards her were provoked precisely by Johnny's efforts. The guy wanted the best future for Colin's gifted daughter, but he didn't like the idea of going to Europe with her. Suddenly, Jack Rand turned to the leader of the rescue squad. It turns out that the Maraud brothers have not forgotten their proposal made to the legendary warrior. The men wanted to present a gift and see Johnny in person again. The guy who thought it was just politeness on the part of the interlocutors was pleasantly surprised. But the club owner was currently busy recruiting a team, which he told the recruiter about. He gladly offered his services, which were too expensive for the hero for today. But he didn't leave the guy to his own devices and suggested he choose players in Paris. This was allowed by the association rules, especially since there were many to choose from in Europe. After thinking about the new information for a while, Johnny, of course, agreed. He hadn't traveled anywhere in a long time, and he could have spent the time profitably. A few days later, a plane from South Korea landed at the French capital's airport. Full of enthusiasm, Mary, Rihanna, and Johnny set off towards new adventures. First, you had to move into housing provided by the association. However, the plans were thwarted by a crowd of reporters who gathered at the exit of the building. Being constantly busy, the warrior somehow lost sight of his own popularity. Fortunately, one of the Maraud brothers was awaiting their arrival. Although he was one of the club's directors, he gladly arrived to meet the distinguished guests. Of course, the press attention was extremely beneficial for Rihanna. But in addition to taking care of the girl, the Frenchman suggested that Johnny give an interview to the local newspapers. It was rude to refuse, so the hero agreed, not leaving far from the cash register. Regarding working for a European club, the man responded with restraint. He had not made a decision. But the question of meeting one of his French subordinate saviors confused the warrior. Eric Thurham didn't play games. He seemed to lead a simple family life. Johnny had a lot of things to do, so he had no desire to seek out a meeting with his former brother on his own. But he wouldn't mind if the other person found him for a private conversation. At this time, the same unemployed Eric was watching the news on a nearly leaky boat in the middle of the ocean. The man understood that he could not miss such a chance. His life could change radically. Within seconds, Thurham had jumped overboard into the open ocean, intending to swim to France. Shocked, the ship's captain considered such an act absolutely crazy, but did not interfere. The Korean delegation reached the Paris Club only a few hours after arriving. Of course, the Moreau brothers didn't want to miss the opportunity and began to persuade Johnny to sign a contract. But on this issue, the hero remained adamant. He wanted a future here only for Rihanna. Having received a refusal, the cunning French tried to offer the guy a physical test. This proposal was followed by several others that gradually made Johnny's blood boil. Unable to withstand the pressure, the leader of the rescue squad attempted a laconic, categorical refusal. Moreau's approval was only given to test Rihanna's abilities. The girl used her uncle as a translator because she still didn't speak French well. It didn't take long to load the digital avatar, and the first test was about to begin. Colin's daughter faced many opponents who needed to be eliminated as quickly as possible. The deadline was 1 minute, so the match started quickly. The speed of the young beauty was truly extraordinary. Even the digital monsters were surprised by such an opponent. After making several successful maneuvers, the young warrior dealt with all the monsters one by one. The testing was brilliantly completed in 22 seconds. Such dexterity even earned Johnny sincere congratulations without any pitfalls, and the Moreau brothers were absolutely delighted with their future gifted possession. Rihanna was in the prime of her superhuman powers and had time to build a remarkable career. The hero was calm about the fate of Colin's daughter. He left her in safe hands. And in general, in a few years, the man hoped to compete with the club in the arena with his own team. Suddenly, all the attention of those present was focused on the entrance to the training hall. The girls almost fainted from the beauty of the young man standing on the threshold. It was Nathan Bernard, a world-famous star who wanted to meet a legend. Such an acquaintance seemed very interesting to Johnny, because the boy was one of the top 3 players and resembled Colin in his youth. Although the young man's visit was a surprise, it would have been a sin not to take advantage of it. The war for supremacy among superhumans began after the completion of the last mission of the Saviors. Johnny's death made this so-called position vacant again. Despite the huge competition, one name was always mentioned among the players. The first person on the French national team to collect all the awards at any competition. Nathan Bernard became the best player in the International Superhuman Games 3 times. And the appearance of the legendary warrior of the past in Paris, of course, touched the young man. Since Johnny had seen the Frenchman for the first time, he didn't understand what he was up to. The blond, handsome man paid attention to Rihanna and politely greeted his new colleague. This made the girl and her mother blush with embarrassment. Nathan made an incredible impression on Mary, even though she didn't understand a word of French. After paying his respects to the others, the young man finally turned to Johnny with greetings. Despite the calm behavior of the interlocutor, the hero suspected something was wrong. Suddenly, the Frenchman reached out to the leader of the rescue squad with his hands, and he thought it was an attack. Preparing for a fight, Johnny unexpectedly felt the affection of France's national hero. Nathan hugged the legendary warrior, noting that he was glad to see him in the European capital. Of course, the hero immediately made it clear that he knew the person he was talking to, but he didn't seem to suffer from stardom, despite his almost brilliant performance, which Johnny managed to check thanks to his analytical eye. Thanks to his super strength, the guy created a double and surpassed Colin at the peak of his form. Almost without losing his strength, Nathan became an invincible opponent. A good antagonist for Bernard would be Walker, whose performance increased where the Frenchman's performance faltered. Thinking about it as the club's chairman, Johnny wouldn't refuse to watch such an exciting match. While thinking about the American, the hero unexpectedly received a question about him. It turned out that no one in the world knew how their duel ended, and when the leader of the rescue squad said that he had given Gerald advice, those present were very surprised. Bernard was shocked that his idol defeated such a monster and even helped him. And while Johnny was discussing some details about those events with the Murrow brothers, Nathan tried to wrap his head around the idea that Walker could be defeated in a duel without help. This prompted the boy to think that he was now facing a real god of war. No one doubted that the hero had spoken the truth, because Gerald had indeed become a better fighter. Praises poured in endlessly for the warrior, and this was starting to piss Johnny off. The guy wanted to shift the focus of attention to Rihanna. While the French star dreamed of a fight with the legend, he was worried about other things. The leader of the rescue squad feared that Rai might succumb to the foreigner's charms. But the girl, even to her mother's surprise, replied that she had different tastes in men. Colin's daughter began to describe the ideal option for herself in this regard. And although she didn't name names, only Johnny didn't realize she was talking about him. Mary, who understood who it was about, began to dissuade the girl, but she didn't want to continue this dialogue. The woman could only watch Johnny and keep him at a distance if she understood. The next day, the group of women decided to go for a walk around the city. Bernard, of course, volunteered to give them a tour, and although the hero didn't like it very much, he had no reason to refuse. The Murrow brothers, who had appeared next to him, asked the boy to accept the gift they had promised to give. Johnny never refused this, especially since he was aware of their armories. Inside the forge, work was in full swing. None of the craftsmen paid any attention to the newcomers, and the scale of the exhibition hall and the variety of tools for killing conquered the heart of the warrior. Not only appearance, but also manufacturability were the hallmark of the Murrow brothers' production. And this is what the leader of the rescue squad could say, based on his many years of experience. The French took him to a stand at the end of the hall and presented him with a gift. It was a set of spears, which Johnny was delighted with at first sight. To activate the weapon, it was necessary to fill it with your own aura. When the leader of the rescue squad did so, the spear quickly unlocked and materialized in his hand. Such an invention was considered innovative because for the legend it was necessary to create something the best. Johnny was incredibly pleased with his new artifacts. The guy thanked his esteemed brothers for such attention. He did not yet know that they planned to sell such spears to anyone who wanted them as weapons of the savior. This information blew the hero's mind. European tricks turned out to be much more dangerous than he had initially thought. The Moros did not intend to offend the warrior and promised to pay him royalties for the use of the name. And as a prelude, they also offered a reward for duels with spears. The prospect of getting easy and big money appealed to the head of the YSM club. Johnny had to think not only about himself, but also about the team that depended on him. Half an hour later, the warrior was already signing a contract with the businessman, unaware of the pitfalls. After the formalities were settled, the Murrow brothers began a new game. Superhuman weapons could not be transported without an official player's license. Johnny fell into the trap but realized it too late to give up. The French offered him the only possible solution to apply to an international association. And so when the girls returned to the hotel in a good mood, Johnny had already signed a contract with the devil, in his opinion. The warrior could not stand the pressure of two resourceful scoundrels. And although it was obvious that this had all been planned in advance, the hero could not punish Murrow for such a ruse. Instead of beating the life out of the French, the boy had to obediently follow their lead. The only good thing was that membership did not impose any obligations on the leader of the rescue squad. But now, after signing all the papers, Johnny felt cheated. The warrior has always seen through cunning schemers, and today, for the first time, experience has failed him. Only Rihanna was happy about the recent changes in her uncle's life. and considering Moro's next proposal regarding signing a contract with the Lumiere Club, they could both represent the same team in the future. The girls' exciting dreams were interrupted by the appearance of Nathan. The guy asked if Johnny had gotten a new weapon and suggested a duel. The young man did not hide his interest in testing the strength of the hero of humanity on himself. The thought of defeating one's own idol was too sweet. The leader of the rescue squad gladly agreed to the Frenchman's proposal. The next morning, Johnny and Rihanna visited the Lumiere Club. Almost the entire team had already gathered there. Reed tried to do everything so that no one would understand that she was afraid. But the hero knew her father too well to immediately understand that she was nervous. Trying to defuse the situation, the guy told how Colin lost consciousness in the dungeon. This really helped, and Rihanna was able to completely relax. The arrival of the foreigners stopped all conversations in the club hall. Johnny focused most of the attention on himself. The audience knew very well who he was. A couple of minutes passed, and one of the Frenchmen quickly materialized near the newcomers. The leader of the rescue squad automatically took the girl with him, but there was no threat. In fact, the giant, Chi-Chi Lucas, was the team's tank and a fan of the legendary warrior. Johnny happily signed his sweatshirt, and he happily ran to his friends. The hero decided to take care of Ria's safety and find out what kind of atmosphere she would have to work in. At first glance, Chi-Chi could be a good candidate for her as a friend, and also extremely strong. With an analytical look, the warrior assessed his abilities. The giant could compete with Nathan in strength. If the tank were to be improved in some positions, he could be among the top 10 fighters in the world. Bernard arrived at the club last and immediately greeted his idol. He was shining like a new penny because of the upcoming duel, because Johnny had supposedly died many years ago. Dreams of that moment seemed impossible. Nathan, who always knew he could get better, hit this ceiling every day that he couldn't overcome. Now that Johnny was standing opposite, the young man's main goal in life was more attainable than ever. No matter how strong the world legend was, the Frenchman believed that he could defeat him. The leader of the rescue squad smiled predatorily in response, anticipating an interesting battle. The conversation between the two opponents was interrupted by the appearance of the Moreau brothers, along with the club's coach. The latter solemnly greeted and said his name, Dubois Goffin. The man suggested that those present divide into two teams with an equal number of players. The coach suggested Nathan and Johnny as leaders. Other club members had to draw lots and rely on chance. Eventually, Chi-Chi Lucas and Rihanna's tank came to the rescue. The division into two camps did not take much time. When the formalities were settled, Dubois announced the start of training. After downloading the program, participants found themselves in the battle arena. No one was in a hurry to attack yet. The opponents were just watching each other. Since there was a pause before the start of active actions, there was time to discuss strategy. Thanks to his analytical gaze, Johnny quickly realized who he was standing next to. Even without knowing the names of his temporary colleagues, the guy appointed them to more advantageous positions. After discussing positions, the basic strategy for the battle was agreed upon. Chi-Chi was surprised by Johnny's level of competence. It turns out that the plan the hero proposed was the most popular among the players. While everyone was busy with their own affairs, the warrior planned to deal with Bernard. He had no doubt that the young man had also built a strategy to free himself from unnecessary responsibilities. The opponents stopped facing each other, ready to rush forward. The problem was that, unlike Nathan, Johnny didn't know all the ins and outs of his opponent. But this did not frighten the warrior. On the contrary, he felt as if he were about to plunge into another dungeon. After an additional signal from Dubois, the teams began sparring. Meanwhile, the Moreau brothers, the coach, and the technical analyst watched what was happening on the monitors. Unlike the leader of the rescue squad, those present knew well that their favorite was ambidextrous, and Johnny was predicted in advance to have many difficulties in confronting such an opponent. In many fights, Nathan has repeatedly shocked his opponents with his double activation technique, and coupled with the unexpected change of the leading hand, this made it an invincible machine. A fierce fight broke out between the teams in the arena. But Johnny didn't budge unlike his opponent. Bernard wanted to move into close combat because he was well aware that the hero had a signature meter-long throw, but any of his attempts to wound his opponent were successfully blocked. The Frenchman was not one of those fighters who gave up after failure. Therefore, he did not stop trying, hoping that one day he would succeed. Unfortunately, the young man overestimated his own capabilities because Johnny didn't even break a sweat. The hero at some point successfully seized the initiative and counterattacked. The meter throw worked on Bernard like a refreshing shower. The young man had to stop for a moment to catch his breath and plan his next steps. It didn't have to last long because during the break, Johnny could regain his strength. Nathan was already using his own potential, 100 out of 100 points. A hail of blows rained down on the leader of the rescue squad, but he just smiled in response. Suddenly, to his own surprise, Bernard saw a gap in the enemy's defense and immediately took advantage of this, hoping that he had made a mistake. But a second before the wound, Johnny stopped his opponent's blade. It turned out that it was a trick that a boy who was not very experienced compared to the hero fell for. The blow to the Frenchman's pride was reinforced by the legend's physical attack. Nathan realized that he could only rely on his own speed because he saw that he had the upper hand in this. Unable to seize the initiative, Bernard could only dodge Johnny's blows. Just like he had a few minutes ago, the warrior did not give the enemy a second of rest. Thus, the leader of the rescue squad wanted to provoke the activation of the Frenchman's skill. He doubled his pressure and simply chased his victim around the arena like a madman. During the protracted attack, it was impossible to seize the initiative. All that remains is to hope that we will be able to repel all the blows. Nathan believed that he had experienced all the skill his opponent was capable of. Besides, all the weaknesses he managed to find were just a trick for his own benefit. Indeed, Bernard had only one way left to use a double to try to win. A few seconds later, Johnny saw exactly the same Nathans in front of him, ready for battle. Thus began a real battle at the maximum capabilities of both opponents. Meanwhile, the audience was amazed by the show they saw. The analyst technician noticed that despite Johnny's ignorance about the enemy, and despite the lack of training, the hero somehow even surpasses the best player in the world. But it was one-on-one, and it is still unknown how the duel against the doubles will end. Nathan and his copy rushed at the opponent from different directions, but it was difficult to hide from the hero's eye. He could see perfectly well what was surrounding him, and having grouped himself as much as possible, he repelled all possible attacks even from behind. Bernard flew around the opponent almost without touching the floor. The blows rained down on the legendary warrior in a hail of blows, but he didn't seem to even strain. Every attack was blocked competently and in a timely manner. The defense was like a concrete wall. Nathan was already starting to gradually despair. It seemed like his slower opponent was keeping up with him with ease. This was the first time the young man could remember that this had happened to him. And it confirmed Bernard's assumption that Johnny was not human at all. He was the god of war who descended to humans. But in reality, the hero's ease was feigned. He also had a hard time withstanding the pressure. The only evidence of this was the footprints on the floor from the warrior's feet. Nathan decided not to change his tactics and press hard until his opponent broke down. All that remained was to hope for luck because Johnny had never lost before. The leader of the rescue squad, of course, expected exceptional skill from the best player in the world. But a battle against two identical fighters was too dangerous, especially if it dragged on. Another obstacle was that the warrior had not studied the peculiarities of the Frenchman's fighting style, and now it seemed that every next attack by the opponent was random. There was no system in the technique. The only solution was to use greater pressure against Bernard in turns with unexpected retreats. And now Nathan was already flying towards his opponent, ready for another clash of blades. It seemed that Johnny was focused only on him and completely forgot about the double. This time, the Frenchman's blade also did not touch his opponent. The young man simply flew past. Although it angered him a little, there was still a great chance for rehabilitation. The hero raised his spear to strike Nathan, but he only laughed in response. Bernard's double at that very moment aimed at Johnny's hand from behind. It took the Frenchman a few seconds to deprive the legend of his limb. The observers screamed in shock. No one expected such a turn of events. It seemed like a step towards Nathan's victory over the legend. But that was exactly Johnny's plan. Losing his arm was a minor obstacle to his advantage, because both opponents now appeared before the eyes of the leader of the rescue squad. With a blow of his left hand armed with a shield, he attacked the double, and it was literally swallowed by the floor. Now there are only two opponents left in the arena. Bernard, enraged by the destruction of the clone, lunged at Johnny, losing control. But at the last moment, he was stopped by Chi-Chi's hand. During the duel, the team led by the rescue squad defeated their opponents. This indicated that Johnny had won. After returning to the real world, he did not hide from Nathan that he had put his hand up on purpose. Observers flocked to their conversation like butterflies to a flame. They wanted to hold another match between world stars. In principle, Johnny didn't mind. He just wanted to be better prepared this time. The coach, not hearing a sharp refusal, decided to lead the legendary warrior to the technician analyst's room. The man's name was Gabriel, and he analyzed all the matches between the players with the help of technical support. The technician was also superhuman, but he did not want to participate in the games. He was weak for this and had a weakness for watching battles from the sidelines. Gabriel gladly explained the specifics of his own work. The man was helped in this by an advanced system that tracked all the avatar's indicators, and with the help of computing capabilities and statistics, it was possible to determine the result without error. Essentially, Gabriel was doing what Johnny was secretly doing, just for the money. Of course, he didn't need the latest system for this, but it would have been useful to Coach Ben. The leader of the rescue squad asked about the cost of the equipment, which of course cost a huge amount. The help from the YSM Club has outweighed everything so far, so it's time for another agreement. He approached the Morrow brothers with a proposal for cooperation. The guy offered to exchange his own combat data for the system that stood in front of him with the technician. This was an unforeseen situation for the French, so they needed a few minutes to think. Their fanatical, reckless love for the leader of the rescue squad prevailed. They agreed and began praising Johnny during the intermission. The day ended exactly as the hero would have liked, and he really liked it. In the evening, the leader of the rescue squad finally returned to his room. Today, he experienced many emotions that were not available to him before. It turns out that battles can be something of a form of entertainment, and not necessarily lead to the death of one of the participants. And the opponent turned out to be worthy enough to make Johnny tense up. Although Nathan was one of the best superhumans in the hero's entire life, he did not want to lose to him. Suddenly, using his analytical gaze, the warrior noticed a new superpower within himself, which was called reinforcement. Throughout the existence of gifted people, no one has been able to explain the nature of the emergence of certain additional abilities. The only thing that was obvious to Johnny was that superpowers were shaped according to the personal qualities of the wielder, or during a negative experience that is most traumatic to the superhuman psyche. This is how the hero himself got his first superpower. In the orphanage where he was raised, the boy was bullied by the director. Almost every day, the man beat and humiliated the little orphan. Eventually, Johnny got tired and decided to take revenge for his suffering. He found a convenient spot to attack the director's car in the middle of the highway, but he chose the right moment for the attack when there were no witnesses around. Suspecting nothing, the man calmly drove home, and when the car caught up with Johnny, he threw a rock at it. If the stone hadn't been so strong, it probably wouldn't have caused so much damage. But during the throw, object control was activated for the first time, because of which the scoundrel director got into a serious accident. At that moment, the young man felt no remorse. On the contrary, after many years, the boy was finally able to smile happily. The next morning, preparations began for the second round of the match between the Lumiere Club teams. Johnny still couldn't figure out where he could get his additional fighting abilities from. The warrior was inclined to believe that the reason lay in indicators of willpower that were unattainable for humans. Combined with the concentration before the fight, the combo had an explosive effect. He decided to immediately test his skills in this duel. Lost in his own thoughts, Johnny didn't even notice that Rihanna was addressing him. The girl was completely overwhelmed. She was killed in the first round without even being able to orient herself. Of course, it was her fault because she had lost her guard by relying on her teleportation abilities. To calm Rhea down, Johnny decided to give her some advice for the future. In response, Colin's daughter began to project her own fears onto her uncle. It seemed to her that Nathan was completely impossible to defeat, but the hero had extraordinary self-confidence, so he stopped the girl in mid-sentence. Apparently, the guy preferred not to talk about his new tricks up his sleeve. It took several minutes to activate the avatars for both teams. The countdown to the start of the training match has begun, during which Bernard built a strategy for the future, confident in his own superiority. Johnny, meanwhile, was figuring out which metric he could boost to gain an advantage. At the last minute, he decided to increase his skill level and see what would happen. The two teams ran to attack each other. This time, Rihanna wasn't running in the front row. The girl stayed behind, carefully watching her opponents. But Johnny didn't have time to follow Colin's daughter. He rushed forward ahead of Bernard. Although he had already turned on the amplification, it was still unclear how it worked because there was no noticeable change. The hero stopped at the right distance from the opponent, allowing him to make a move. He immediately obeyed and began to disperse his forces. This time, Nathan decided to use the double almost immediately, which Johnny decided to take advantage of as he was about to throw his spear. When the artifact flew towards the Frenchman, he didn't stress too much because he thought he had time. Bernard's speed allowed him to avoid the attacks of a hero who was inferior to him in agility. This is exactly what the leader of the rescue squad was counting on. A second after Nathan thought about it, the spear began to move much faster. The acceleration became so rapid that the Frenchman barely had time to dodge the blow. At that moment, the boy was only worried about himself and did not take into account that his double could also suffer. The acceleration worked as well as it could. Now there was no point in thinking about the annoying clone. The strange changes in Johnny's abilities did not go unnoticed. Up until this point, no performance of the legendary warrior had indicated such capabilities. But there was no time to stop, so for his own safety, Nathan decided to change strategy. Because the boy had activated his superpower, he now had a limited amount of aura, and he should have taken better care of himself, but Johnny wasn't going to give him points. The hero caught up with his opponent very quickly and attacked him, ending the fight with a clear victory. Bernard did not expect such a sharp change of roles between the first and second rounds. As soon as the fight ended, Nathan immediately began demanding a rematch from Johnny, but he was in no hurry to agree. Citing fatigue after a busy day, the Frenchman was not going to give up so easily. He was a persistent young man. Understanding this and respecting his opponent's aspirations, the hero willingly agreed to a new duel. Immediately after activating the avatars, Bernard cloned himself. Johnny liked this behavior of his opponent. He respected his full involvement in the process. The young man rushed into the attack, guided by one thought. He had only one chance for revenge, and this time he must not fail. Nathan preferred to think that the previous defeat was, rather, a mistake of his own self-confidence. But Johnny watched the Frenchman who had no idea what awaited him. Over the course of 2 rounds, the hero managed to understand Bernard's strategy well, and with overwhelming reinforcements, he was not afraid of the prospect of exhaustion in a protracted battle. The two opponents met in a fierce confrontation. None of them was inferior to the other. Blows rained down in a hail from both sides of the leader of the rescue squad, and he decided to optimize his review by changing his own trajectory relative to his opponent. None of the Nathans were supposed to be behind Johnny and be able to attack. In addition to maneuvering, the hero decided to exhaust the Frenchman to the maximum, alone without wasting too much energy. Thanks to the reinforcement, the warrior managed to keep his opponent at the right distance. Johnny moved forward and backward, deftly changing direction. And when Bernard thought he had already achieved his goal, disappointment awaited the young man. Although the hero also experienced difficulties due to the fact that the enemy's equipment did not deteriorate, quite the opposite. Therefore, the leader of the rescue squad decided to use the rest of the teams at his own discretion. Suddenly, he found himself near the opposing team. They didn't even have time to understand anything, and you were already out of the game. Thus, Johnny's team gained the advantage in the score. Of course, the leader of the opposition didn't like it, and the hero decided to play with his feelings, preparing to perform the second trick. Nathan rushed into the attack, forgetting about everything in the world. But instead of dodging or counterattacking, Johnny eliminated another enemy. This was a signal for Bernard. The young man was losing control. Not allowing the leader of the opposing team to recover, the warrior attacked him from the air. The spears almost touched their targets, but the best player in the world managed to maneuver. Catching his breath, the Frenchman forgot about the members of his own squad. But after a few seconds, their screams reminded them of the error in their strategy. Johnny, smiling, awaited his opponent's next move. He never stopped mocking Nathan's hot temper out loud, and when he once again reached the peak of his anger, he suggested attacking. Shocked, the observers did not even know how to comment on this spectacle. The coach, although he understood Johnny's status, still always preferred his own player, and he was incredibly annoyed by the Moro brothers' fanatical love for the South Korean. Despite Dubois' optimism, the technical analyst pointed out the obvious. The Frenchman was not in control of the fight. In addition, the changes in Johnny's javelin-throwing skills remained incomprehensible. It was strange and incredible at the same time. No matter how hard Bernard tried to overcome his opponent, he seemed completely impregnable. It seemed that the leader of the rescue squad had calculated his opponent's next actions in advance. But this, according to those present, is a completely impossible ability. At some point between attacks, Johnny noticed again that Nathan had lost his vigilance, and he immediately took advantage of it. The spear flew towards his column, which tried unsuccessfully to dodge the blow. The attack proved fatal for the double. Focusing on the first artifact, the copy did not have time to concentrate on the hero who was nearby. He hit his opponent with his shield so hard that he had no chance of survival. The real Nathan watched this counterattack, shocked by what had happened. For some reason, it was this event that allowed the young man to understand the full meaning of the title of Savior of Humanity. Despite Johnny's true greatness in Bernard's eyes, the latter's ego wouldn't let him stop. He chose a goal for himself that at the moment seemed unattainable. But this only motivated me to develop my own abilities in order to ultimately gain an advantage. Having expectedly lost in the last round, Nathan still couldn't accept it. The hero decided to encourage the guy and confirmed his superiority compared to the American. He advised Bernard to pay more attention to his own strength indicators and develop in this direction. The young man was not against advice from the older genius, but the coach interrupted their conversation. To the surprise of other observers, Dubois, although praising the Frenchman's abilities, began to flatter Johnny. He was interested in how the legendary warrior predicted the enemy's attacks along with his double. Since the leader of the rescue squad didn't want to reveal his secret superpower, he simply wrote everything off as his own greatness. Saying goodbye at the club, the Moro brothers in Dubois thanked Rhea and Johnny for their attention. And although the girl did not kill a single opponent during her training, she did not lose her relevance for them. The hero understood perfectly well that Rihanna was confused and frightened by the intense pressure. But this was just the first experience. Under the close guidance of experienced coaches, she could easily flourish. The guy liked that from now on. He was essentially free from obligations to the girl. Johnny had more time for himself and to explore new facets of his own strength. Sometime later, in his hotel room, he was deciding what to apply the amplification to. After some thought, the warrior decided to strengthen his other superpowers with a new acquisition. First, he upgraded his analytical gaze. This really turned out to be useful because in addition to the metrics, he could now see video footage of the fights. With such an enhanced ability, searching for new players for the club will be much more efficient and faster. Thanks to the enhanced throw, all the objects the boy dropped returned to him on their own. Moreover, it did not waste any of its other indicators. Of all the superpowers, only immortality remained, and Johnny didn't know what to expect from his enhancement. After activating the superpower, the hero's body began to rapidly change before his eyes. The warrior seemed to dissolve into thin air. It turned out that by activating the two powers together, he could transform into a stream of aura for 2 minutes. And now immortality reflected not only the physical attacks of opponents, but also any others. Johnny immediately wanted to test his abilities in this state. Since he could pass through any objects, the boy decided to fly outside. In a moment, he passed through the roof and found himself above the buildings of Paris. He chose to carry out attacks in this state as his next test. He was thinking of returning to his hotel room, but suddenly Johnny felt evil. It was definitely some kind of monster, and from the dungeon he could even see its aura. An unexpected encounter with a monster tickled long-forgotten nerves and brought happiness. Without thinking twice, the hero flew towards the demon to engage in a fight. On the way, Johnny threw a spear towards a potential opponent. None of the people walking the streets even noticed that anything suspicious was happening. The warrior was amazed by his new ability to sense evil around him in this altered state. He watched as the trajectory of his artifact changed, taking his time flying forward. The spear found its victim, and although wounded, she was still somewhere nearby. Understanding and feeling this, Johnny decided to go in search of the missing piece. But unfortunately, the boost in immortality has ended. Despite the hero's wishes, the aura of which he was composed began to be drawn to the hotel room. The chance of catching up with the monster was becoming increasingly remote. Enraged, Johnny landed on the floor of the room. He was determined to continue the fight and no longer believed in the success of his plans. This is how the warrior became acquainted with the biggest flaw of the reinforcement function: time constraints. In this case, another question arose: how long the recovery would last. When he rose into the air the next time, there was no sign of the evil being's presence. He didn't know, but it made perfect sense because the wounded demon had fled to his master. He justified his own inability to complete the mission by attacking himself. His elder brother didn't want to hear any explanations and simply killed the useless man. It was impossible to disrupt the plans because the future fate of the dungeons depended on it. Despite a thorough search, John was never able to find his spear, so he remained in the body of the evil spirit, which managed to escape. This indicated that in an altered state, the boy could actually feel the approach of a dark aura. Now, knowing that the monsters are still alive and roaming the earth, Johnny more than ever was ready to meet them again. The next day, the Morrow brothers came to the soldiers' hotel and brought with them an analytical technician. But they explained that they agreed to give the man away as a person who understands analytical equipment. Gabriel kindly agreed to sign a contract with the leader of the rescue squad. According to the indicators, he was indeed a natural analyst or a coach in his own right. This was a great find for the YSM club. Johnny didn't even try to hide this fact. He explained to his potential colleague what he expected when he moved to South Korea. But Gabriel understood this perfectly well. He had his own motives. Analytics was conquered by working alongside the best players in the world. And so now he wanted to watch Johnny because he surpassed Nathan in everything. Despite the decent pay, the technician was interested in several other things. He didn't want to just coach a second-rate team. Gabriel wanted to raise YSM in the rankings a year to the South Korean First Division. And in addition, Johnny himself had to agree on some issues. The analyst wanted the hero to participate in club fights several times a year, and this forced the leader of the rescue squad to seriously reflect. In the end, the club chairman's ambitions outweighed his own desires, and Johnny agreed. The two parties agreed on a date for signing the annual contract. Of course, the Morrow brothers had their own interest in this. All this time, they were busy posting Johnny's photos on the official Lumiere Club page. This incredibly annoyed the warrior, but he could do nothing. The cunning ones could not be changed. Still, in this arrangement, the hero believed he received more than he gave. The acquisition of an analytical system, a trainer, and the acquisition of a new superpower hastened the return home. But despite this, his photo was still posted on the official pages of the French club for some time, which was incredibly annoying to Lumiere's competitors, especially the German club led by a former member of the rescue squad. The man's name was Emre Kesa, the father of the Berlin Lightning. After arriving in South Korea, the club immediately began modernization work. Everything happened under the watchful eye of Gabriel, who didn't miss a single detail. While the analyst tormented Ben with his instructions, the club members tried to understand what kind of person he was. The latest player analysis system was also impressive. Not everyone could afford such equipment. At some point, when all the technical issues were resolved, it was time for the official introduction. Johnny first made up a little speech. He drew an analogy between his own dream about the lottery ticket and the team he was watching now. This greatly encouraged promising young men and women, and it was at this moment that the hero decided to present the club's new head coach to their discretion. Gabriel stepped forward, waiting for the speech in his honor to end. Taking the floor, the new head coach promised not to pressure Ben in any way. The man was supposed to help him establish communication with the players and give advice regarding future plans. Gabriel immediately set his ultimate goal, the First Division. Despite the reaction of those present, the man had no doubt that he would get the result. Because in addition to the above, Johnny himself agreed to participate in the club's matches. But in order not to discourage the players, the host of YSM quickly added that he didn't want to bring it to that. After getting to know each other, it was agreed to hold the first group training session. Everyone did their best to make a positive impression. At this time, Gabriel drew conclusions about each of the personalities. When the training was over, Johnny and the analyst got together for a conversation. Tyler did not please the technician because of his poor performance. Of course, thanks to his analytical eye, the hero managed to see something that the computer did not know. He saw leadership potential and wanted to develop it by growing the player, which had the prospect of becoming a strong obstacle for opponents. Since it was impossible to tell the specifics of his own vision, Johnny relied on intuition. The chairman advised Gabriel to put Tyler as the chief tactician. The idea was received positively. The analyst also noted the work of Oliver and Eddie. Of course, Johnny saw in them both the very qualities he was paying them for. The technician liked the first one's work better, but in the second, younger one, he couldn't see anything special at all. The warrior came to the defense of his ward, promising a breakthrough in his abilities. The leader of the rescue squad noted that his foresight has never failed in such matters. In fact, there was only one step left before that. It was necessary to increase the aura indicator by 1. Some more time passed, and Gabriel finally got to the team's training plan. In his opinion, only Johnny's presence with such a program was a driving force forward. Of course, he was absolutely right, because it was at the beginning of their collaboration with Ben that the club won its first victories. But from now on, the analyst decided to do everything on his own. The second training session consisted of working on specific skills, namely speed. Lindsay is expected to be the leader in the competition among the team members. And last of all was Eddie, who could not gather his will into a fist. Sam is the team captain. He tried his best to motivate the guy, but it was all in vain. He was completely disillusioned with his own abilities and would not yield to any persuasion. In his imagination, the rest of the team had to enter into his predicament. Eddie was depressed by constant defeats and failures. After the run, Gabriel tried to analyze the rapid jumps in progress of some players. It all looked like some kind of cunning trick. Quick results couldn't come from anywhere. The 5 club leaders acted as one well-established mechanism. Each of them knew their place and performed their functions 100%. It was obvious that they wouldn't have achieved this on their own, so Johnny's role was undeniable. And thanks to the hero's participation in some matches, one could not worry about the prospects of leadership. Gabriel was absolutely convinced of this when he saw Thomas's hidden abilities as a tank. The legendary warrior somehow noticed that he was able to block damage from enemy attacks. This was not just a testament to Johnny's foresight. In the eyes of the analyst, the leader of the rescue squad now seemed almost a prophet. While the head coach analyzed the team's performance, Eddie suffered in the yard. The young man didn't notice when the club president approached him and raised his head in surprise. Johnny wondered about the reason for the discord in his ward's soul, and he immediately gave out all the depressive moods he had inside. In his opinion, it was impossible to achieve the indicators of comrades with the existing development. So instead of fighting, he accused Johnny of making a mistake about himself. The guy was so used to complaining that he couldn't see a way out of the trap he had fallen into. The hero tried to calm the boy, reminding him that nothing comes without hard work, but he only resisted more. Finally, Johnny, whose patience had worn out, grabbed the boy by the scruff of the neck and dragged him along. He didn't want to just throw money away, so he decided to take drastic action. For about 2 hours, Eddie had been trailing behind the warrior to one of the mountain peaks surrounding the base. Of course, the boy didn't understand why he had to do this, so the older man decided to move on to personal topics. Having warned that a special place awaits the young man on the mountain to train his superpower, he emphasized that sometimes it was the right place that enhanced the aura of superhumans. The hero talked about his childhood in an orphanage from which his ascent began, about the brutal behavior of the institution's director. With his easy submission, even his henchmen began to beat innocent children. It was the extreme events and the appropriate location that activated Johnny's aura surge. And now Eddie was going to try this technique on himself. Time was short, so he didn't warn the young man about the details in order to turn him on as much as possible. Having climbed to the top, the hero led the younger one to a dark cave in the rock. With one push, the warrior threw the team member down into complete darkness. The boy obviously didn't like it at all, but Johnny didn't care. He wanted to get results from the young man, so he promised to leave him here for 10 days. Eddie should have spent all this time improving himself and coming out of the cave a different person. Finally, the club owner warned that if the player ran away, it will be found so quickly that it won't even take you a moment to blink. The shocked young man had no choice but to accept the new conditions of his existence. At first, Eddie fell into despair, which in principle was no different from the standard feelings of recent days. He began to remember all the moments of hope that ended in another loss, all the moments when he hated himself for being weak, all the desires that he buried deep in his soul, neglecting development. Eventually, Eddie realized that he himself was the person who stopped himself before he even started the fight. Only one person, the best player in the world, believed in him more than he did. If Johnny did not deviate from his vision, then the young man had no right to lose faith in himself. Thus began a great titanic work. 10 days later, a completely different Eddie's head appeared above the cave entrance. Of course, the hero couldn't leave the boy alone, so he watched him through the camera. Such a quick conversation with the boss initially drove the young man into a dead end. The guy was surprised that he had been safe all this time. There was still time left until the second half of the season for self-improvement and mastering new skills. After spending about a Sunday on additional training, the club president and Eddie showed up at the base. None of the people they met on the way understood what was happening. Johnny just smiled, mysteriously promised to introduce the team's new star. There was some chaos in the head coach's office. Not understanding anything, the club owner asked about the latest news. As it turned out, many clubs were hunting for Lindsay, trying to take advantage of the transfer window. The girl was a YSM star, and Johnny didn't want to give her to anyone, at least not yet. Of course, Tyler was of greater value to the hero, with whom he would never want to say goodbye. Personal lessons with the analyst bore fruit, and now the guy has grown several heads in skill. The legendary warrior even came up with several strategies in honor of such an event. Gabriel said the most interesting matchup would be Tyler versus Daniel Mansky. The guy was a support for the Berlin Lightning, who was coached by a member of the Savior Squad, Emre Casa. Of course, Johnny remembered this pedant well. Even when he was the leader of the squad, this man did not give him a pass with his instructions. But now it was time to talk about something else. Pushing Eddie forward, the hero announced that the boy would become one of the main players. And although Gabriel had doubts about making this decision, the coach's opinion changed when he evaluated the young man in action. After a month of hard preparation, the parade of matches finally began. The first was to be a duel between old enemies, YSM and the GT Knights, whom Michael advised to buy. The change in the main lineup of Johnny's team also aroused interest. No one knew the boy's abilities, but Eddie was personally chosen by the hero, and this made him a potential star. And although, in fact, in his motivational speech before the battle, the warrior did not demand anything extraordinary from the young man, still, he didn't want to disappoint his mentor. The commentators announced that today's arena was to be an inverted forest. The boss there was a giant tree that could suck the aura of players it wanted to capture. The smaller monsters in this dungeon were the Zardlands, voracious seeds. The knights immediately divided into 3 teams of several players each, but the YSM squad was divided into 2 groups with an equal number of participants. When everything seemed to be clear, Eddie separated and began to act independently. Viewers could not understand the meaning of such a strategy and initially considered it a mistake, until the young man turned on the Shadow Walk. One of the enemy detachments, consisting of 4 people, was trapped surrounded by the Zardlands. Suddenly, Lindsay joined the monsters and immediately started shooting. The group leader ordered them to ignore the girl and look for Tyler. The boy was their weak spot. The knights mistakenly believed that the experience of other teams would help them overcome their opponents. They rushed from the encirclement in the other direction. Along the way, one of the telepaths began to scan the space around him, looking for a target. Lindsay, it seemed to them, while protecting Tyler, was trying to catch up with her opponents. Suddenly, the scanning eye caught a figure that, while in a safe place, was not moving. In the opinion of the knights, this was the one they needed. Team Angel Johnny watched as the seniors' plan came to fruition. 4 opponents were near the desired player in a matter of minutes. They hoped to resolve the fight with little resistance, but to their surprise, hiding under the hood was Thomas, the YSM team's tank. This confused all the cards. A mistake was made that could have cost the group their lives. The rest of Johnny's team was already rushing to help his brother. Tyler was also seen among the players, acting as a tank. The guy immediately used his telekinesis to hand the equipment to Thomas, and he, in turn, threw the backpack he was carrying behind his back towards his opponents. The leader of the group of knights looked inside with curiosity. This was an irreparable mistake. The seeds of the Zard lung were just waiting to be released. They were able to grow at an incredible speed, capturing everything around them in their clutches. 4 players had no chance of survival, especially when members of the opposing team came to the aid of the monsters. The guys dealt with their opponents quite quickly and earned their first points. The remaining knights were surprised by the rapid decrease in their own numbers. This forced them to regroup and change tactics on the fly. But not everyone managed to escape the monster's tentacles. One of the players needed help and was delaying the retreat. The leader of the Knights team decided to help his brother. He successfully managed to save the boy in a matter of minutes. But with surprise, he saw that Billy, who had just been rescued, began to struggle with the air. And when his brother stopped, the captain decided to check what was going on. The man approached the player and touched his shoulder. But he suddenly fell to his knees. The unfortunate man was imperceptibly eliminated in front of everyone. Events began to unfold typically because the enemy was not visible visually. Of course, the knights couldn't know that this was all the work of Eddie, who was lurking in the darkness. Before either of them could open their mouths, the young man's blade had stripped the opposing team of players. Although the enemy commander did not see the killer, his reaction was enviable. He noticed the faint fluctuations in Eddie's aura and realized that he was hiding in the shadows. Of course, after that, the opponent came out into the light, constantly looking around. Taking advantage of what he thought was a good moment, the young man decided to attack from behind, but he was quickly thrown back by the shield. The blow was really strong and completely nullified the effect of surprise. It was necessary to urgently consider changing the attack strategy. Back in training, Johnny tried to teach Eddie to think ahead, and this young man had a very difficult time. The very fact that everyone was stronger than him reawakened his self-doubt. To change this mindset, it was necessary to endure a lot of teasing from the elder, And in the end, the guy did come to the idea of limiting the variability of the opponent's actions. That, afraid to remain in the shadows, enemies will come out into the light. You can also use it to your advantage. Johnny did not leave his charge completely unarmed. He suggested using a crossbow. The guy had good performance in both long-range and close-range combat, and he could easily handle such an artifact. Eddie fired several arrows at the enemy commander. He easily repelled the young man's naive attack. Taking advantage of the distraction, the shadow player rushed into the attack again. Armed with a dagger, he ran up to his opponent from behind. The man managed to look back, and a fierce fight broke out. Eddie was not going to give up. Johnny approved of this behavior of his ward. Now he could clearly see his growth. It was possible to reduce the variability of the enemy's actions only during constant activity. At some point, the knight's commander launched a counterattack, but Eddie tripped over a pebble on the ground and rolled backwards. Such a spectacular fall slightly confused the opponent, and he even stopped halfway. The young man took advantage of this, instantly disappearing. He chided himself for having disgraced himself so much in front of millions of viewers. At this moment of self-exploration, the enemy thought he had finally understood all the attacker's capabilities. He considered Eddie an inexperienced young man who could be easily handled, and I stopped being afraid altogether. Meanwhile, the rest of the YSM team at the other end of the dungeon was fighting to the death with the monsters. They were unable to help their brother deal with the last living knight. The fate of the fight's outcome depended solely on Eddie. Peeking out of the darkness after a while, the boy rushed at his opponent for the third time. They met face to face. This time, the young man did not act treacherously. Seizing the opportunity, the knight's commander counterattacked the attacker. And although he managed to jump back, the sword reached his body. The injury occurred in the leg area. But despite this, the young man was in no hurry to hide in the shadows. The opponent, analyzing what he saw, suspected that Eddie's aura had run out, and I decided to take advantage of this opportunity. The unfortunate boy stood still and seemed to have finally given up. The knight's sword hung a meter above his head, but he never managed to touch the target. At the last moment, Eddie hid in the darkness and quickly moved behind the enemy. While he was looking confusedly at the emptiness before him, the boy decisively hit him in the neck, finally putting an end to the battle between the two teams. It was a carefully thought-out tactic mixed with impeccable acting. Of course, Eddie hid his aura and intentionally didn't use his own abilities. He wanted to catch his opponent, and he gladly fell into the trap. The young man almost lost consciousness from happiness. He managed to kill 3 opponents single-handedly. Now his faith in the legendary mentor has increased many times over. In the very first battle, Eddie became the most productive player. Because of this, the guy immediately gained a huge fan base and attention from reporters. Johnny was pleased with his multi-stepper. This victory came quite easily to the YSM players, which led to thoughts about possible primacy on the world stage in the near future. The next day, the hero began to feel completely bored. With the arrival of Gabriel, all communication responsibilities with the team were reduced to a minimum, and dramas stopped interesting Johnny with their typical plots. Apart from TV series, there was nothing worthwhile on TV, and this completely derailed the hero. It was urgent to come up with something to do so as not to go crazy. At this moment, fate sent the leader of the rescue squad a gift that he did not expect. The guest rang the doorbell, and after a while the warrior opened them and couldn't believe his eyes. On the threshold stood a member of the 7 Saviors, the god of axes, Eric Thuram, in person. An awkward pause formed between the comrades. The Frenchman reminded the former captain of his promise to meet, and he said that he saw the interview while he was on a ship in the middle of the ocean. Because of this, the man had to jump overboard and travel a considerable distance to France. When he finally got home, he was also beaten by his wife. Because of this, a lot of time passed, and Johnny had already left the country. There was no reason to be surprised by the story, because the man had the ability to improve his character and survival instinct. This lucky scoundrel couldn't die, not even from old age, let alone from some kind of accident. Mary, hearing the conversation in the hall, hurried downstairs and saw the guest. The woman set the table so that Eric would not deny himself anything and could rest after a long journey. The conversation went slowly. Of course, his brother reprimanded Johnny for not telling anyone about his own immortality, but the hero replied that he had gained this superpower after the gates of hell were closed. Hearing the answer, Eric immediately reached into his backpack for the gift. He pulled out the stone of return from there. Surprised, Johnny took the artifact in his hands. He had never expected to see anything like it. Eric said that such stones could be seen among collectors, but they were not in demand, especially since dungeons are a thing of the past. Only Johnny knew that this was not so, and this little thing appeared in his hands at the right moment. The prospect of once again plunging into the world of endless wars invigorated him. 2 days later, the Frenchman was supposed to go home. They said goodbye to the leader of the rescue squad on a very warm note. But when the door closed behind the guest, Johnny's thoughts were completely absorbed in preparing for the meeting. He pulled out one of Rihanna's old backpacks and began packing the necessary things into it. Colin noticed that his friend was going somewhere and asked why. In fact, the hero often did this in the past. He could disappear for 3 or 4 days. So now, without intending to explain anything, I tried to do the same. Already on the threshold, Johnny promised to return in 3 days. Getting on his motorcycle, the warrior did not know what awaited him in the location to which he was heading. But thanks to high-speed transport, it was possible to find out very quickly. He left the Iron Horse in the middle of the expressway, surrounded by mountains. The rest of the road required walking activity. After several hours of intensive searching, Johnny finally found the same place. The Stone of Return could help the boy get to the treasures he had been accumulating for years. After clearing this dungeon, the hero did not destroy the core, turning the monster lair into a secret warehouse. He didn't remember in detail what exactly was stored there, but all these artifacts cost money. Johnny headed for the secret passage, using a lot of reinforcement. This allowed the hero to save the lion's share of time. The goal was achieved. The leader of the rescue team stood in front of a giant boulder that covered an opening in the rock. Opening the passage took some effort. As soon as this happened, a long familiar energy began to seep out of the darkness. Johnny wanted to get to the bottom as quickly as possible. Teleporting to the dungeon, the boy took a deep breath. At first glance, his hideout appeared just as he had left it. Since his return, the leader of the rescue squad has not felt happy. This option became available to him only here and now. He was a man of war whose body could only renew and gain strength in the dungeons. Wandering through countless corridors, the warrior felt truly alive. Lying on the couch in Colin's living room, he often thought of places like this. But I regretted that the monsters and demons were finally finished. Once here, Johnny could only think about the return of the battles for survival, the adrenaline in his blood. He didn't like the peaceful life on the outside, and it didn't suit his soul. He had dreamed of such a fate since childhood, and I still wondered why he had returned from the world of the dead to a life he didn't belong to. The conversation with Eric, the Stone of Return, and the memories of the caravan stretched before his eyes. Johnny only regretted that the ghostly feeling of a demon's presence in France had been a figment of his imagination. As the leader of the rescue squad thought about this, he suddenly felt the presence of a dark observer. There should have been no one in these catacombs, and for many years, there was no evidence at the entrance that anyone had entered. But every cell in the boy's body indicated that he was not alone in the dungeon. Johnny took out one of his spears, and activating it, he began to call out to the monster. No matter how much the hero shouted, the trail of the dark creature only became fainter. After wandering around a bit, listening, the warrior even decided that he had imagined it again. Suddenly, I received a powerful amount of dark energy in my back. Despite all the threats that might lurk in the depths, he decided to explore the dungeon again. It seemed like a fun pastime, even if the clothes weren't for dueling. Johnny went in search of adventure. Previously, a demon who was engaged in monster breeding lived in this hideout. Therefore, cells for holding mutants in captivity were seen everywhere. Before the warehouse was built here, every corner of the dungeon was carefully explored. But despite this, some monsters still managed to survive. He didn't see the evil spirits visually, but he could already clearly hear them grinding on the floor. The guy was eager to meet his opponent as soon as possible, and finally the giant monster managed to crawl out into the light. It turned out to be a giant skunk, which had grown to an impressive size in 17 years. All that remained was to hope that the monster hadn't found all the treasures and artifacts. The appearance of such creatures indicated that the cleanup had not been thorough, and Johnny couldn't admit it to himself because he knew his attitude towards work. He did the cleaning perfectly and without any complaints, but before him, to his surprise, stood evidence of the negligence of the rescue team. This awakened the hero's spirit of militancy, and he intensified his throw. The first spear was supposed to go towards the monster, but it immediately counterattacked. Johnny had to defend himself, but at a good moment for himself, the guy still managed to make a throw. The spear hit the target. While the monster writhed in pain, the warrior changed his position. Returning the weapon to his hands, Johnny attacked again. The second throw was followed by a third and several others. In the end, the Zardlun was destroyed. This caused a powerful explosion, and although Johnny was immortal, he still, by inertia, bounced back. After the fight, the hero again began to feel nostalgic about the possible remnants of demons. He wanted to meet the otherworldly beings face to face at least a few times. The warrior couldn't even imagine a better gift for himself. After an hour of research, the leader of the rescue squad finally found one Zardlun seed. This dangerous little thing could be the only valuable thing in the vast catacombs. At least from selling seeds, the hero could earn a little extra money. Johnny decided to explore the dungeon deeper, but I never found any artifacts in any of the rooms. There was only one room left that the monster couldn't open on its own. It contained the surviving core of the dungeon, and Johnny once put a special seal on the gate. The guy opened the door, making sure in advance that no one had violated its integrity. But inside, apart from the core, there was nothing left either. It was so strange that Johnny froze in place. This was where he kept the magic stones. They were of no value to humans, unlike demons. Such a disappearance could indicate that some individuals were still alive. An additional argument in this favor was the hero's spear, which he lost in France. Finally, the weapon was found, and that meant that the demon near the Eiffel Tower got screwed. From that moment on, the smile on the hero's face could not be erased. While the puzzles in the head of the leader of the rescue squad were coming together, a stranger appeared behind him. This was undoubtedly the energy of a difficult demon. The appearance of a new enemy cheered the warrior even more. A representative of an otherworldly race was slowly approaching the man. He was in no hurry to attack, which allowed Johnny to see it in detail. According to the red color of the aura, a representative of the third level of difficulty appeared before the guy. Suddenly, the demon spoke, but in his own language. Of course, the hero didn't understand her, so he responded with his own, greeting her impolitely. Unlike humans, these monsters were able to learn and assimilate new things quickly. This one so far couldn't speak human, but Johnny didn't doubt him. A few minutes passed before the demon called him a Korean man. He wondered if anyone was in this dungeon with the hero, but he calmly replied that he came here alone. Of course, a representative of the otherworldly race considered humans to be something not worth paying attention to. The leader of the rescue squad could not pass by calmly. He noted that it was humans who destroyed his opponent's population, which made him incredibly angry. The guy started talking about the last dungeon, and he stopped all the demon's attempts to attack at the very beginning. Johnny said that hunting such representatives of another race was considered a good way to earn money. Large fees, status, and most importantly, the pleasure of killing gave life a zest. It was these feelings that raged inside the hero's soul. He desired retribution. The demon was incredibly annoyed by human stories. He considered them a filth and a desecration of the honor of the race. Therefore, in a moment, a real confrontation began between the opponents. A dozen snakes flew towards Johnny, who tried to surround him from different sides. Despite the grandiose attack, it all turned out to be a waste of time, because the goal has long disappeared. With the help of a dexterity boost, Johnny found himself behind the enemy's back. He told about the core of the dungeon he had seen last time so that the monster would believe it. While repelling the man's attacks, the enemy was surprised and tried to figure out what was happening. At the last moment before the hero's final attack, it finally dawned on him. Before him was the same vile leader of the rescue squad. Because of this understanding, the demon's anger seemed to triple, but his strength wouldn't even be enough to hurt the boy's toe. Johnny easily dealt with all the monsters. He decided to move on to dessert, especially considering that he managed to tell his opponent everything he knew. Destroying all the monsters along the way, Johnny quickly reached his opponent. He thrust his spear into the enemy's chest and he gnashed his teeth. With the help of a throw, the demon flew to the far wall of the room. Although it seemed that the attack was fatal, Johnny knew full well that this was just an appearance. He was in no hurry to kill the enemy because he wanted to learn more information. The angry representative of the afterlife looked straight into the boy's eyes. Demons had no names, they called each other by their profession. This individual was looking for places where he could get hold of an aura. He was just a pawn in the hands of someone more powerful. Therefore, it was rational to continue the interrogation. Johnny pulled out his spear and thrust it into his opponent's chest again. He expected an honest answer about the state of the demon race today, but the scoundrel wasn't going to split so quickly. He suddenly plunged into a wave of chauvinism towards humanity. Johnny wondered if there were other magisters like the one he had met at the gates of hell. The answer was negative. Although the Seeker reported that the race of representatives of the afterlife survived, the demon began to talk about the appearance of a certain prophet who was to lead the remnants of the army. People will have to bow down or die when the exiles come to light. Having uttered the last prophecy, the evil spirit exploded. It was spectacular, especially considering that Johnny now didn't have to hide. Despite the self-immolation, the demon was still alive and, looking at the boy, suddenly became active. He called him a prophet, seeing something familiar in the aura. But the hero, considering this a posthumous delusion, simply finished the job.